I'm Alex, 28, and I swear my family has been on a lifelong mission to make me feel like the odd one out. If you've ever been the disappointment child, you'll know exactly what I mean. That invisible label that follows you into every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every phone call. Growing up, my brother Daniel was the golden boy. Straight A student, football team captain, parents' pride and joy. And me? I was the quiet kid who liked sketching cars in the margins of my homework and building little contraptions in the garage. No trophies, no medals, no "look how amazing our son is" moments. Just me trying to stay out of the way. By the time we were adults, the favoritism wasn't subtle anymore. I'd show up to birthdays and get polite nods, while Daniel would walk in and the room would light up like a Christmas tree. It was the kind of dynamic you try to laugh off in your 20s, but deep down it leaves a bruise. I kept my distance as much as I could, moved into my own place, got a decent job in IT, and kept contact minimal. Not because I hated them, but because I was tired of feeling like I had to prove I was worth a seat at the table. Then last month I got a group text from Mom. Big news. Daniel is engaged. There was a flurry of heart emojis and congratulations from everyone, including relatives I hadn't heard from in years. I sent a quick congrats and figured that was the end of it. But a week later, I found out through Facebook, not even from my family, that there was an engagement party coming up at this fancy vineyard just outside the city. Pictures of the invitation were posted by my aunt, and every cousin was commenting about what they were going to wear. I called Mom, trying to be casual. Hey, so, are we all going to the engagement party? What should I bring? There was a pause on the other end. Then her voice went soft, like she was trying to let me down gently. Oh, Alex, honey. This is just for the kids who make us proud. I blinked, stunned. I'm sorry, what? Before she could say more, I heard Dad's voice in the background, laughing. You'd ruin the pictures anyway, he called out, like it was some kind of joke. I just sat there holding my phone, feeling my ears go hot. Right? I finally said, my voice flat. Got it. It would have been bad enough if it ended there, but word travels fast in my family. The next day, my brother texted me. Finally a party without the embarrassment. No offense. No offense. I stared at that message for a good minute before I shut my phone off. And just when I thought I'd hit my limit, my grandma, the one person I thought might actually have my back, called me and said, almost cheerfully, "You know, Alex, some people just don't deserve a seat at the table." That one hurt more than I expected. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time, feeling this mix of anger, shame, and something else I couldn't quite name. I'd always been good at swallowing things, but this time it didn't sit right. Something in me shifted that day. I didn't say anything to them. I didn't send angry texts or make a scene online. I just watched from the sidelines as they posted more and more about this big, perfect event they were planning. The catering, the decorations, the designer suits. Everyone gushing about how it was going to be the party of the year. And then, last week, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hi, is this Alex?" a polite voice asked. "I'm calling from Greenleaf Vineyards about the upcoming engagement party. We've been trying to get in touch with your parents, but the deposit deadline has passed, and the bill is still unpaid. Could you let them know?" I sat there in stunned silence for a second, then something slow and cold started to curl in my chest. "Yeah," I said finally, my voice steady. "I'll let them know." And I hung up, smiling for the first time in weeks. I didn't tell them about the call right away. Honestly, I wanted to sit with it for a while, let the absurdity of the situation sink in. They had spent weeks making it clear that I wasn't welcome, and now, the first sign of trouble, the vineyard had called me. Not Mom, not Dad, not Daniel. Me. The embarrassment. At first, I thought maybe it was just some clerical error. Maybe they'd already paid, and this was a harmless mix-up. But then, 2 days later, I got a second call. This time it was the vineyard manager herself. "Hi Alex, sorry to bother you again, but we really do need to settle the balance. The event is 2 weeks away, and if we don't get payment soon, we'll have to release the date to someone else." I could almost picture it, Daniel's fiancée already posting aesthetic Pinterest boards about her dream engagement party, Mom bragging about the vineyard on Facebook, Dad polishing his speech, all of it hanging by a thread. And for once, I wasn't the one being left out. I decided to keep quiet a little longer. Maybe that sounds petty, but you have to understand. I'd spent years being left out of group chats, forgetting to be invited to family dinners, having my accomplishments brushed off as if they were footnotes. Oh, Alex fixed someone's network outage. Cute. Daniel just got promoted to manager. This was the first time the universe had tossed me a bit of leverage, and I wasn't about to waste it. The next time I saw them was at Sunday dinner. I almost didn't go. After all, I wasn't exactly proud kid material, but something in me wanted to see how far they'd go before someone mentioned the vineyard problem. I showed up right on time, but the moment I walked through the door, the conversation stopped for half a second, like they hadn't expected me to actually come. Mom forced a smile. "Oh, Alex, you made it." "Yeah," I said simply, shrugging out of my jacket. Dinner was the usual show. Dad bragging about Daniel's latest work achievement, Mom fussing over Daniel's fiancée and how radiant she looked, Grandma asking loudly if anyone had heard from my cousin Greg, who hasn't called anyone in 6 months. It was like I wasn't even there, until the topic inevitably circled back to the engagement party. "Everything's almost set," Mom was saying. "The florist confirmed, the DJ's booked, it's going to be just perfect. Except the vineyard still doesn't have a check," I said casually, reaching for the mashed potatoes. The entire table went silent. Daniel looked up sharply. "What are you talking about?" I shrugged, keeping my face neutral. "They called me last week. Said the balance wasn't paid." Mom's face went red. "They called you? Why would they call you?" I tilted my head. I guess I was listed as an emergency contact or something. "They said if it doesn't get paid soon, they'll have to cancel." Daniel scowled. "That's ridiculous. I gave Dad the deposit weeks ago." Dad waved his hand dismissively. "It's handled. Don't worry about it." But I noticed the quick flicker in his expression, that tiny flash of unease before he turned back to his wine glass. I didn't push it. Not yet. The rest of dinner went on, but there was a tension under the surface now. Mom was quieter, Daniel kept checking his phone, and Dad got up twice to take a quick call. I just ate my food, smiled politely, and let them stew. Over the next week, I started noticing little cracks forming. Daniel posted less about the party on social media. Mom called me one night, which she never does, just to check in. She tried to slip in a question about whether the vineyard had called me again, and I played dumb. "Oh, I don't know. I get so many robocalls these days." What? By the weekend, things were getting desperate. The vineyard called me a third time, this time practically begging for a response. "We really don't want to cancel, Mr. Taylor, but we need something by Monday." I could feel the tension mounting like a storm front. At this point, I was curious to see how long my family would keep pretending everything was fine before they broke and came to me directly. Sure enough, on Monday morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. "Alex, could you come by tonight? We need to talk about something." No smiley face. No pretense. Just a short, clipped message. When I got there that evening, the mood was different. The house felt heavier somehow, quieter. Mom was pacing the kitchen, Dad was sitting at the table with a stack of bills, and Daniel was leaning against the counter, his fiancée looking uncomfortable beside him. "We're having a little issue with the venue," Mom started, wringing her hands. "Nothing major, just a timing problem with the payment." Daniel cut in, scowling. "They're threatening to cancel." I leaned against the doorway. "That's rough." Mom looked at me like she was about to say something, then stopped. Dad cleared his throat. "We were wondering if you might be able to help us out. Just for now. We'd pay you back, of course." I just stood there, letting the silence stretch, the power shift hanging in the air like a held breath. For once, I wasn't the one on the outside looking in, they were. And that's when I realized I had a choice. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just let the request hang there, hanging in the thick silence of the kitchen like smoke. For the first time in my life, I saw my parents waiting on me, actually waiting, as if my decision mattered. I can't explain why, but that look on their faces, that tiny crack in their usual certainty, gave me this strange surge of power I wasn't used to having. "Help you out how?" I asked finally, though I already knew. Mom clasped her hands together. "Just a short-term loan. The vineyard wants the rest of the payment right away, and there's been some delays with your father's bonus." "Delays?" I repeated flatly, glancing at Dad. He didn't look at me. "We'd pay you back before the wedding," Mom rushed on. "You know we wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." I didn't respond right away. I just walked over to the table and sat down across from Dad, staring at the stack of bills. "That's a lot of paper for someone whose finances are handled." That made him bristle. "Watch your tone," he snapped, the old edge creeping into his voice. And just like that, the moment of vulnerability was gone. There it was, the same sharp, dismissive tone that had followed me through my teenage years. The one that meant my feelings were irrelevant, my opinion unnecessary. Daniel crossed his arms. If you can help, then just help. Why do you have to make everything about you? That one stung. Make everything about me? I repeated, laughing once, a humorless little sound. You mean like how you all made the entire party about making sure I wasn't there? Daniel rolled his eyes. Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. It's not that deep. Not that deep. I felt my voice getting tighter, sharper. You told me I'd ruin the pictures. You texted me. What was it again? Finally a party without the embarrassment. Daniel didn't even flinch. I was joking. No, you weren't. I shot back. You've never joked about that. You've meant it every time. Mom put a hand on my arm like she was trying to calm me. Alex, this isn't the time. No, this is exactly the time. I cut her off, standing up so fast the chair scraped against the tile. You told me I wasn't good enough to sit at your table, and now you want me to bankroll the table? Do you even hear yourselves? There was a silence, so sharp you could hear the clock ticking in the next room. Daniel's fiancée looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. Dad's jaw tightened. Sit down, he ordered. No, I said, my voice calm now. I think I'll stand. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Daniel snorted. Fine. Forget it. We don't need your money. We'll figure it out ourselves. But the look in his eyes said otherwise. He was worried. He knew they didn't have the cash. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. Good luck with that, I said, heading for the door. Mom called after me, her voice almost breaking. Alex, please, don't do this. This is your brother's big moment. I turned back long enough to meet her eyes. Exactly. His big moment. You all made it very clear it's not mine. And then I left. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I just walked out into the cool night air, my heart pounding in my chest. Driving home, my mind was a storm. Part of me was furious. How could they ask me for money after everything they'd said? But another part of me was almost relieved. For years I'd been holding out hope that one day they'd see me, respect me, treat me like I mattered. Tonight had put that hope to bed. And as painful as that was, it also gave me clarity. The next few days were icy. No calls, no texts. The family group chat was strangely quiet except for my aunt posting a countdown meme about the big day. I went about my life, went to work, grabbed drinks with a friend, pretended like my family drama wasn't sitting in the back of my mind like a ticking clock. Then Saturday rolled around, 2 days before the vineyard's deadline. I was at the grocery store when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel, and just seeing his name made my stomach clench. It said, wow, Mom's crying because of you. Hope you're happy. If this party gets canceled, it's on you. I stood there in the cereal aisle staring at my screen, the words burning into my brain. Something about that message, the casual blame, the assumption that this was my fault, flipped a switch inside me. I typed back slowly. I didn't cancel anything. Pay your own bills. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about every family dinner where I'd been talked over, every holiday where I'd been left out, every joke at my expense that I'd laughed off just to keep the peace. It all stacked up like bricks until I could barely breathe under the weight of it. Around midnight, I got up and sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen. I still had the Vineyards number saved. My mouse hovered over it for a long time before I finally clicked. Hi, this is Alex Taylor. Yes, I'm aware of the balance. No, I won't be paying it. I just thought you should know that the family you're hosting is currently ignoring your calls. The woman on the other end sighed. Thank you for letting us know, Mr. Taylor. We'll try one more time tomorrow, but if we don't get anything by Monday, we'll have to release the date. When I hung up, I felt lighter, like I'd just set something in motion, something I couldn't take back. The next morning, Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door, and there she was, looking exhausted, her hair pulled back like she hadn't slept. Alex, she said, her voice raw. You're going to ruin this. You know how much this means to your brother. I leaned against the doorframe. No, Mom. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just not saving it. Her face crumpled like I'd slapped her. We raised you better than this. I almost laughed. Did you? Because from where I'm standing, you raised me to know my place. Outside the room, away from the table. Well, I know my place now. And it's not fixing your mess. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she just turned and walked back down the hall without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest heaving. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. By Sunday night, the group chat was blowing up, my aunt asking why the vineyard wasn't returning her calls, Daniel posting angry messages about how unreliable people were ruining everything, Mom sending a vague, "We might have to move the party" text. I watched it all in silence, saying nothing. And then Monday morning came. Monday morning felt strangely calm, like the air right before a thunderstorm. I woke up early, made coffee, and just sat at my kitchen table scrolling through my phone, waiting for the inevitable fallout. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with a call from the vineyard. "Mr. Taylor, I wanted to let you know we still haven't received payment. We've made multiple attempts to contact your parents, but unfortunately, we'll be releasing the reservation by end of day." I thanked her and hung up, heart thudding. This was it. The moment everything would start to unravel. Around noon, I got a group text from Daniel. Unbelievable. They gave away the date. Nice job, everyone. The floodgates opened. My aunt sent 3 panicked messages about how the invitations were already printed. My cousin asked if they were just going to have it in the backyard now. And Mom went silent, which, for her, was worse than yelling. Then came the individual texts. From Dad, "You had a chance to be part of this family, and you blew it." From Mom, "I hope you're proud of yourself." From Daniel, "We'll never forget this. You just made enemies of your own family." I sat there reading them over and over, each one like a tiny paper cut. The guilt tried to creep in, that old, familiar voice telling me I was the problem, that if I had just gone along with what they wanted, everything would be fine. But then I thought about that first phone call, about Mom saying the party was for the kids who make us proud, about Dad's laugh, about Grandma's words. No, this wasn't my mess. Still, the fallout hurt. That night, I drove past my parents' house and saw cars parked all up and down the street, an emergency family meeting. I didn't go in. I just sat there for a minute, headlights off, imagining what was being said inside. I could picture it perfectly. Dad pacing, Mom crying, Daniel ranting about how I'd ruined his perfect day. And in a way, it stung to think of them all united, not in celebration, but in anger at me. Part of me wanted to knock on the door, to explain, to make them see that this wasn't my fault. But I didn't. I put the car in drive and went home instead. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No texts, no calls, no accidental updates from my aunt on Facebook. It was like I'd been scrubbed from the family narrative entirely, and that hollow ache in my chest got heavier with each passing day. On Wednesday, I ran into Grandma at the grocery store. Normally, she'd at least give me a curt nod, but this time she didn't even acknowledge me. She just pushed her cart past me like I wasn't there. I don't know why, but that one hit harder than all the angry texts combined. I went home and sat on the couch staring at the ceiling, trying to process the weight of it all. I wasn't just excluded from the party anymore. I was excluded from them. Completely. That weekend was supposed to be the engagement party. I saw pictures online of relatives dressed up anyway, sitting at my parents' house with paper streamers and a cake from the grocery store. Daniel's fiancée smiled for the camera, but it didn't reach her eyes. The comments were full of, "It still looked beautiful," and "Family is what matters," and "So glad we could all be together." I closed the app and set my phone down. For years, I had convinced myself that if I just worked harder, achieved more, was easier to love, they'd eventually treat me the way they treated Daniel. But staring at those photos, I finally accepted that it would never be enough. I could hand them the moon, and they'd still call me an embarrassment. That realization hurt more than anything else, but it also gave me a strange sense of freedom. If nothing I did would make them see me as an equal, then I had no reason to keep bending myself into knots for their approval. The next day, I called a lawyer friend from college. Not about anything dramatic, not yet, but just to ask some questions. About contracts, about deposits, about what options an event venue has when a client defaults on payment. He was curious, but didn't press too hard, just gave me a rundown of how these things typically work. "You'd be surprised," he said at one point. "Most places would rather negotiate than lose a client entirely, especially if someone else is willing to take over the contract." That little piece of information stuck with me. I started thinking about what would happen if I called the vineyard back. What if I asked them to reinstate the date, not for Daniel's party, but for something else, something of my own? At first, the idea felt ridiculous. What would I even throw a party for? But the more I thought about it, the more appealing it sounded. Not as revenge. Not yet. But as a statement. Over the next week, I quietly started looking into it. The vineyard was hesitant at first. We just canceled that reservation, and there are fees involved. But when I offered to pay the full amount up front, suddenly they were all smiles. It was strange, writing that check. I wasn't rich by any means, but I had been careful with my money, saving for years. It was more than I had ever spent on a single thing in my life. And yet, as I handed it over, I felt lighter. This wasn't about Daniel anymore. This was about me. Of course, I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Let them think I was sulking in my apartment, licking my wounds. In reality, I was planning. The invitations weren't fancy, just a simple design I ordered online, but when I dropped them in the mail, my hands were steady. I invited a few close friends, some coworkers, and even a couple of my cousins who'd quietly reached out to me after the cancellation to say they thought what happened was wrong. I didn't post about it online. I didn't text the group chat. I just waited. And then, 2 weeks later, the first rumor hit. My cousin messaged me privately, asking, "Are you really having an event at Greenleaf next month?" I smiled at my phone before replying. "Yeah," I typed. "I am." She didn't say anything for a moment, then just sent back, "Wow, that's going to go over well." I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mix of nerves and anticipation. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I was waiting for their reaction. And I had a feeling it was going to be explosive. The weeks leading up to my event felt like living with a secret too good to share. For years, I had been the invisible one, the one who went along quietly while my family made the rules. But now, for once, I was the one with the plan. It was subtle at first, just a private satisfaction that made getting up in the morning feel lighter. My coworkers noticed it too. "You seem different," one of them said as we grabbed lunch. "Yeah," I asked, playing it off. "Yeah, happier. Like you know something we don't." I smiled. "Maybe I do." I didn't tell them everything, but I did tell them I was hosting something special soon. A few of them looked surprised. I wasn't exactly known as the party type, but they were quick to RSVP when the invitations came through. Meanwhile, the family silence was starting to break, but not in the way I expected. At first, there were just stray comments on Facebook from relatives, cryptic posts about loyalty and family coming together. Then, a week before my event, Daniel texted me out of nowhere. "So, I hear you booked the vineyard. What's that about?" I stared at my phone for a long time before replying with just, "It's a celebration." His reply came back instantly. "Of what?" I typed back, "You'll see." And then I left it at that. The next day, Mom called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Alex," she started, skipping pleasantries. "What exactly are you planning?" "An event," I said simply, keeping my tone calm. "An event," she repeated. "At the vineyard we chose?" "It's a nice place," I said. "I thought it would be perfect." There was a long pause, and then she sighed heavily. "You know how this looks, don't you? People are going to think you're trying to upstage your brother." I let that hang for a beat. "Am I?" I asked, my voice cool. Another pause. "Alex, please. This family has been through enough embarrassment." I almost laughed at that. "Embarrassment," I said, letting a bit of steel into my voice. "Funny how I've been the one carrying that label all these years, but suddenly you're worried about what people will think." She didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, she said, "Don't do this." But there was no real authority in her voice this time, just a flicker of fear. "I'm not doing anything wrong," I said finally. "I just booked a venue. The rest is up to you." And with that, I ended the call. After that, the tone of the family group chat shifted completely. For months, I'd been the ghost in the chat, the one whose messages went unanswered. But now, every time I posted something vague, a photo of a wine glass, a screenshot of a menu, I could practically feel the tension radiating back through the screen. One of my cousins texted me privately, "Dude, whatever you're doing, this is the most fun our family chat has been in years." They're all freaking out. I couldn't help but grin at that. Meanwhile, my own preparations were coming together beautifully. The vineyard sent me sample menus, and I picked every dish with care, not because I wanted to rub anything in anyone's face, but because I wanted this event to be exactly what I had always been denied, a space where I belonged. When I sent out the final RSVP confirmations, I was surprised at how many said yes. Friends, coworkers, even a couple of distant relatives who had quietly expressed sympathy after the engagement party fiasco. But the biggest shock came 3 days before the event, when I got a message from Daniel's fiancée. "Hi, Alex. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I just wanted to say, I think what happened with the party was awful. You deserve better. And honestly, I think what you're doing is brave." I had to read the message twice to believe it. Brave wasn't a word anyone in my family had ever used about me. "Thanks," I wrote back, unsure how else to respond. She replied almost immediately, "If I could, I'd come. But Daniel would lose his mind." That one made me pause. It was the first time I realized she might not be as on board with the family narrative as I thought. It planted a seed. 2 days later, the morning of the event, I woke up before sunrise. The air felt electric. For a long time, I just sat on the edge of my bed staring at the RSVP list, letting it sink in that this was actually happening. By late afternoon, the vineyard was glowing. The staff had outdone themselves. The tables were set with white linens, candles flickered in the golden light, and the garden outside looked like something out of a magazine. As guests started to arrive, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was about rewriting the story. One of my coworkers clapped me on the shoulder. "You really went all out, huh?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "I guess I did." And then, just as the sun was starting to set, I saw a familiar car pull into the parking lot. It was my parents. For a moment, I just stood there frozen, heart pounding. I hadn't invited them. I hadn't invited Daniel either. But there they were, stepping out of the car, looking around like they'd just walked into enemy territory. Mom's eyes found mine across the lawn, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then she started walking toward me. I didn't move. Mom's heels clicked against the stone path as she approached, every step sharp enough to cut through the music drifting from the speakers. She looked impeccable, of course, hair perfect, outfit carefully chosen, but there was a tightness around her mouth that told me this wasn't a social call. Dad followed a few paces behind, his expression unreadable, the way it always got when he was about to scold me, but wanted to appear reasonable first. "Alex," Mom said finally, stopping just in front of me. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were scanning everything. The tables, the candles, the guests who were beginning to glance over curiously. "What is this?" I gestured around us. "A party," I said evenly. "I thought you liked parties." "This isn't funny," she said sharply. "You booked the exact venue we chose for Daniel's engagement party. People are talking about this. They think you're trying to embarrass us." I tilted my head, as if considering it. "Are you embarrassed?" Her jaw tightened. "This isn't about me. This is about family. About respect." That one nearly made me laugh. Respect? The same people who told me I'd ruined the pictures were suddenly lecturing me about respect? Before I could answer, Dad stepped in, his tone low and controlled. "Alex, call this off. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. You got everyone's attention. Now stop before you make a scene you can't take back." I looked between them, taking in the carefully neutral expressions they wore, the ones that always meant their patience was running thin, that I was on the verge of disappointing them again. And suddenly, I didn't feel small. Not anymore. "Call it off," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "No, you don't get to tell me to cancel this. Not after you canceled me." Dad's eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting." That old phrase, the one they'd used my entire life to shut me down, to make me doubt my own feelings. This time, it didn't work. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "For once, I'm reacting exactly the right amount." Mom glanced over her shoulder and noticed people watching us, including a few of my coworkers and cousins. Her perfect composure cracked for just a second before she smoothed it over with a tight smile. "Can we talk about this privately?" she asked. "No," I said. "You told me I wasn't good enough to sit at your table. Well, this is my table, and you don't get to sit at it unless I say so." Her lips parted like she might argue, but then she caught the look on my face and went quiet. Dad muttered something under his breath, probably an insult, and started to turn away, but that's when I said it. "Oh, by the way, the vineyard told me about the unpaid bill. Interesting how you had money for Daniel's ring, the suit fittings, the cake, but not for the venue deposit." That stopped him cold. His back stiffened, and when he turned to face me, there was a flash of something raw in his eyes. Guilt, anger, maybe both. "You had no right," he began. "They called me." I cut him off. "They thought I might be able to reach you. And you know what? I could have helped. I could have fixed it. But why should I? I could see Mom's composure unraveling by the second. She took a step closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You're going to humiliate your brother in front of everyone. Is that what you want? I met her gaze steadily. I just want you all to know what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. And with that, I turned and walked back toward my guests, leaving them standing there, forced to decide whether to stay and watch or retreat. Inside, my heart was pounding, but not from fear, from adrenaline. For the first time in years, I was setting the terms. As the evening went on, I kept catching glimpses of them lingering at the edge of the crowd, watching but not joining. It was surreal. My parents, the arbiters of who was in and out in the family, now standing on the sidelines. And then, halfway through the night, Daniel showed up. He didn't just arrive. He stormed in, not even glancing at the staff as he made a beeline for me. "What is this?" he demanded, loud enough for a few guests to look over. I set my drink down and faced him calmly. "It's called an event, Daniel. People have them all the time." "You're pathetic," he spat. "You couldn't stand that we had a perfect engagement party, so you had to make it about you." "Perfect," I said, letting my voice carry just enough that the nearby guests could hear. "You mean the party that got canceled because nobody paid for it?" He froze, and I saw the color drain from his face. "You had no right to." "They called me," I said, my tone steady. And I said no, because I was done cleaning up after a family who thinks I'm an embarrassment. There was a ripple through the room. People pretending not to listen, but very clearly listening. Daniel looked around, realized he was losing control of the narrative, and stepped closer until he was practically in my face. "You're going to regret this," he hissed. I smiled. A small, calm smile that I knew would infuriate him more than anything. "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight." For a long moment, we just stood there, staring each other down. Then he turned on his heel and stalked out, his fiancée hurrying after him. The rest of the evening felt electric. People kept coming up to me, quietly offering words of support, telling me I'd handled myself well. A few even admitted they'd wondered for years why I was always treated like the odd one out. Later, as the last guests were leaving, the vineyard manager approached me. "Mr. Taylor, I just wanted to say, it was refreshing to see how graciously you handled everything tonight. Most people would have lost their temper in that situation." I thanked her, but inside, something sharper was forming. This night wasn't just about reclaiming a little dignity anymore. It was about showing them that I could do more than just stand up for myself. I could change the entire dynamic. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of texts from relatives. Some were supportive, saying they were proud of me for finally standing up to the favoritism. Others were furious, calling me selfish or vindictive. But the most telling message came from Daniel. "You think this is over? Fine. Just wait. When the wedding comes, you won't even be invited. And no one will care." I stared at that message for a long time, then set my phone down with a strange sense of calm. He had no idea what was coming. Because if they thought this was just about a party, they hadn't seen anything yet. The morning after my event, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not the jittery, anxious clarity of confrontation, but a steady, calm one. The kind you get when you know exactly what needs to happen next. Daniel's last text replayed in my mind like a challenge. "You won't even be invited." Good. Let him think he's shutting me out. He had no idea that I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and pen, writing down everything I knew. The unpaid vineyard bill, the catering contracts they bragged about but hadn't finalized, the custom invitations already printed with a date they no longer had reserved. My lawyer friend's words from a few weeks ago echoed in my head. Venues would rather negotiate than lose a client entirely. So, I made a call. "Hi, this is Alex Taylor. I understand there was a previous booking for the Taylor engagement party that was canceled. I'd like to inquire about taking over their wedding date." The woman on the other end was quiet for a second, probably processing what I'd just asked. "You mean you want to reserve the same weekend they had blocked out?" "Yes," I said evenly. "If it's still available." It was. I paid the deposit that afternoon. It wasn't about throwing a second party, not exactly. I wasn't going to spend a fortune just to have a petty gathering out of spite. But reserving that date did 2 things. First, it secured leverage. Second, it made it impossible for them to simply slide back in and pretend nothing had happened. 2 days later, the fallout began. Daniel called me. not texted, called, which was rare enough that I almost didn't recognize the number. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tense, bordering on furious. Alex, we just tried to rebook the vineyard for the wedding, and apparently someone already reserved it. The exact same weekend. I swear to God, if this is you. Click. I saved the voicemail. The next day, Mom texted, please call me. We need to talk about the date. I waited 3 hours before replying. Sorry, busy at work. An hour later, she sent another. You don't understand, Alex. The invitations are already out. This is a disaster. I stared at that message for a long time, then typed back. You told me I didn't deserve a seat at the table. Consider this me making sure you save a few chairs. No reply. That weekend, I went to the vineyard to finalize a few details for my booking. The manager was professional, but I could tell she was curious. You do realize this is the same date your family had been asking about? I do, I said. I just figured since they couldn't pay on time, I might as well make use of it. She gave me a look, not judgmental, just knowing, and nodded. We'll make sure everything runs smoothly for you. Meanwhile, the group chat went from awkward silence to outright chaos. Daniel sent a passive-aggressive message about selfish people ruining other people's happiness. My aunt tried to smooth things over with family should stick together, and my cousin sent me a private message that just said, legend. By Monday, Mom was at my door again. Alex, she said the moment I opened it, her voice low but urgent, please release the date. I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. Why? Because this is Daniel's wedding. It's supposed to be his perfect day. Perfect, I repeated. Like the perfect engagement party you all made sure I wasn't welcome at. Her lips thinned. This isn't the same thing. Yes, it is, I said. It's exactly the same thing. Only this time, you can't just pretend I don't exist. She took a deep breath, like she was trying very hard not to lose her temper. You're hurting the whole family. I almost laughed. No, Mom. I'm just no longer volunteering to be the one who gets hurt quietly while everyone else has a great time. Her composure slipped for just a moment, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but fear. Real fear that I might actually go through with this. And that's when I knew I had them. I didn't cave. I didn't yell. I just smiled politely and said, I'll think about it. But I didn't think about it. I confirmed the date and paid in full. Word got around fast. Within days, the entire family knew. I started getting messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Some begged me to reconsider, others accused me of being cruel. One uncle even tried to call me immature, which made me laugh out loud. This from the man who once refused to attend Thanksgiving because someone forgot to make pecan pie. Meanwhile, Daniel escalated. He posted a long, dramatic rant on Facebook about betrayal and jealous siblings trying to ruin our happiness. His friends chimed in, calling me names, saying I should be ashamed. I didn't reply. Instead, I started planning exactly what I would do with the date I'd secured. I wasn't going to just have a dinner. I was going to make it an event they couldn't ignore, and I was going to invite everyone except them. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake anymore. It was about rewriting the narrative. They had spent years controlling how I was seen in this family, and now, for once, I was the one telling the story. I upgraded the package at the vineyard, added a live band, upgraded the menu. I didn't care that it cost extra. I had been saving for years, and I figured if there was ever a time to invest in something meaningful, this was it. When the invitations went out, I didn't send them to the family group chat. I sent them individually, one by one, to the people I actually wanted there. A few cousins reached out privately, torn between loyalty and curiosity. Are you sure this is a good idea? One of them asked. Absolutely, I said. But no pressure. Come if you want to. If not, I'll understand. And that was the difference. I wasn't demanding anyone's presence. I wasn't guilting anyone. I was just building something I believed in and letting people choose whether to be part of it. The night before the event, I got one last message from Daniel. If you go through with this, you're dead to me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned off my phone, set it face down, and went to bed early. The next day, I woke up calm. The vineyard was ready. The band was setting up. The sun was shining. It was, ironically, a perfect day for a wedding, just not Daniel's. As the first guests started to arrive, I caught a glimpse of a car slowing down just outside the property. I knew that car. It was my parents. They didn't pull in this time. They just sat there, watching, as if trying to decide whether to confront me again or drive away. And then another car pulled up behind them. Daniel's. He got out, slammed the door, and started walking toward the entrance. My heart started pounding, not from fear, but from anticipation, because I knew this was the moment. The moment everything would come to a head. And this time, I was ready. Daniel's footsteps crunched on the gravel as he stormed toward me, his jaw set and his face flushed with anger. The vineyard was bathed in soft afternoon light, the kind that made the tables glow and the candles look like they were floating. Guests were mingling nearby, holding glasses of wine, but one by one they noticed him and went quiet. It was like the air itself shifted, heavier, expectant. "Are you kidding me?" Daniel's voice cut through the murmurs. "You actually went through with this?" I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there calmly, hands in my pockets, letting him rant. "You ruined my engagement party," he continued, voice rising. "You stole our venue. You stole our date. And now you're, what? Throwing some kind of victory party just to rub it in." I took a slow breath and looked around at the guests before answering. "I didn't ruin anything, Daniel. You and Mom and Dad made your own choices. You told me I wasn't welcome. You laughed about it. And when you needed me, the first thing you did was blame me for not cleaning up your mess. This," I gestured to the event around us. "This is me saying I'm done being the family's punchline." "You're pathetic," he spat. "You think anyone here actually cares about you? They're just here for the free wine." A few of my friends exchanged looks, and one of them said loudly, "Actually, we're here because Alex invited us. And because he's a good person who doesn't deserve to be treated like garbage." The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Daniel," I said quietly, but firmly, "you might want to lower your voice. People are listening." He glanced around and realized he'd lost control of the narrative again. For once, there were witnesses. People seeing the golden boy lose his temper while I stayed calm. That's when Mom and Dad finally got out of the car and approached. Mom's face was pale, Dad's was stone. "Alex," Dad said stiffly, "whatever point you think you're making, it's gone far enough. Release the date. Cancel this event. Do the right thing for once in your life." That last part hit me like a slap, and then, strangely, it didn't hurt. Not the way it used to. I straightened, feeling taller somehow, stronger. "I am doing the right thing," I said evenly. "For me. For the first time in my life." Mom stepped closer, lowering her voice to a pleading tone. "Please, think about your brother's reputation. People are talking." "They should," I said. "They should talk about how you told your own son he'd ruin your pictures. About how you said I didn't deserve a seat at the table. About how you begged me for money after you spent weeks reminding me I wasn't part of this family." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "This isn't about revenge," I continued. "This is about boundaries. I'm not your scapegoat anymore. I'm not your backup plan. And I'm not going to disappear quietly just because it makes you more comfortable." Dad's expression hardened. "Then you're no son of mine." That line, the kind that would have gutted me a year ago, just made me feel oddly calm. "Maybe not," I said softly, "but I am a man who knows his worth. And that's enough for me." There was a long, loaded silence. Daniel looked furious. Mom looked close to tears, and Dad just stood there like a statue. Finally, Mom turned on her heel and walked back toward the car. "Come on," she said to Daniel over her shoulder. "We're leaving." But Daniel didn't move. He just stood there, glaring at me, until his fiancée, who had been standing a few steps back this whole time, put a hand on his arm. "Daniel," she said quietly, but clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Maybe this isn't about Alex ruining anything. Maybe this is about you." That seemed to knock the wind out of him. His anger faltered for just a second before he yanked his arm away and stormed back to the car. When they drove off, the tension that had been hanging over the vineyard seemed to break like a popped balloon. Conversations resumed, the band started playing again, and someone handed me a fresh glass of wine. One of my coworkers leaned over. "That," he said with a grin, "was the classiest takedown I've ever seen." I just nodded, my hands still a little shaky from the adrenaline, and took a sip of wine. The rest of the night was incredible. We ate, we laughed, we toasted to new beginnings. For the first time in years, I felt truly present. Not like a supporting character in someone else's story, but like the main one in my own. Later, as the evening wound down and the last guests were leaving, I stood outside under the vineyard's string lights, looking out over the rows of grapevines. The stars were starting to come out, bright against the dark sky. I thought about all the years I had tried to earn a seat at their table, tried to prove myself, tried to shrink myself to fit into the mold they wanted. And then I smiled. Because tonight, I hadn't just gotten a seat at the table. I had built my own table, and it was full of people who wanted to be there. As the last candle flickered out, I whispered to myself, I didn't just get even. I got free. And for the first time, I really believed it. I'm Justin, 28, and up until a few months ago, I was the guy who kept the family running, financially, at least. Rent payments? I made them. Internet bill? In my name. Even my brother's car insurance was quietly auto-paid from my account, because apparently, I was the responsible one. I didn't complain too much, because I had a good job in tech, lived comfortably, and honestly thought helping them out was just what you did when you loved your family. That changed the night I got that text. I had just finished a late shift, sitting on my couch with takeout when my phone buzzed. I'm quitting my job. You'll cover my rent. No question mark. No please. Just a statement like I was some sort of family ATM. For context, my brother, Kyle, is 25 and has always been the golden child. Growing up, he was the kid who could do no wrong. Missed assignments were my fault for distracting him. Broken windows were blamed on me even when I wasn't home. I'd hoped adulthood would even things out, but nope. If anything, it got worse because now money was involved. I stared at the message for a full minute, chopsticks suspended midair. I could feel that familiar wave of irritation rising in my chest, the one I'd swallowed 1,000 times before. I typed back, pay it yourself, and hit send before I could overthink it. 5 minutes later, I was pulling up the contract I'd been offered for a job overseas, a position I'd been hesitating to take because of family obligations. That night, I signed it. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mom. Don't come home for Christmas until you co-sign his $200,000 loan. My jaw dropped. $200,000? For what exactly? Kyle's latest business idea, a sneaker reselling startup, had already crashed and burned 6 months ago. He still owed me for the shipping fees. I'd spotted him back then. And now my mom was issuing ultimatums like I was some kind of villain for not bankrupting myself on his behalf. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat in silence, letting it all sink in. The years of being the fallback plan, the fixer, the quiet provider. My hands were shaking, but not from anger. From clarity. Something in me clicked that night. I got up, grabbed my laptop, and went through every single account with my name attached. Utilities, streaming services, phone plans, you name it. One by one, I removed my payment info. By the time I went to bed, the only thing I still paid for was my own rent. And that was only for another 2 weeks until my move. By morning, my phone looked like a slot machine going off. 52 missed calls, 17 texts from mom, 10 from dad, and Kyle spamming the family group chat with messages like, "Are you crazy?" and "I'm going to lose my place." I just set the phone down, made coffee, and watched the sunrise like nothing happened. For the first time in years, I felt free. Later that day, mom called me again, voicemail this time, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Justin, what did you do? The internet's down, your brother can't make his car payment, and your father is furious. Fix this now, or don't bother coming home." I didn't fix it. Instead, I poured myself into preparing for my move. Every box I taped shut felt like a small act of rebellion. At work, I started handing projects off to coworkers, secretly enjoying how light my calendar was getting. But the messages from my family didn't stop. If anything, they escalated. Kyle started sending me photos of eviction notices, as if guilt tripping me would magically make me open my wallet. Mom shifted from angry to pleading, saying I was tearing the family apart. Dad even left me a voice message calling me selfish and ungrateful, which made me laugh out loud in my empty apartment. That laughter died down quickly, though, when they showed up at my place unannounced 2 nights before my flight. I opened the door to find Mom and Kyle standing there, faces stormy. Mom pushed past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation, and Kyle followed, arms crossed. "You can't just abandon us," Mom said, voice trembling. "Your brother's life is falling apart." I leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You mean the life where I pay for everything while he plays video games all day? Yeah, that life's over." Kyle's face went red. "I told you, I'm quitting to focus on my real career. This is what family does. They invest in each other." Funny, I said, because I don't remember anyone investing in me when I was working double shifts in college just to afford textbooks. Mom gasped like I'd slapped her. That's not fair, she said, but there was something flickering in her eyes. Guilt, maybe? Before I could press further, Kyle slammed his hand on the table. If you don't co-sign the loan, I swear. I cut him off. You'll what? Not talk to me. Promise. The room went dead quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy enough to crush you. Mom finally grabbed Kyle's arm and pulled him toward the door, muttering something about seeing what Dad has to say about this. The door slammed behind them, leaving me standing in the middle of my half-packed apartment, heart pounding. I thought that would be the end of it, that they'd go home, cool off, and let it go. But I was wrong. The next morning, I got an email from my bank about a suspicious attempt to access my account. Then another from my credit card company about a declined application for a $50,000 line of credit in my name. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This was war. I sat staring at my laptop screen long after the email notification faded. A $50,000 line of credit attempted in my name. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake, some random identity theft attempt. But when I called the bank and confirmed that the application had been filled out using my address, my phone number, and even my middle name, a chill ran through me. Only a handful of people knew all that information, and 3 of them were currently blowing up my phone. The bank rep on the line was professional but curious. Do you know a Kyle? She asked. My stomach dropped. He listed himself as an authorized user on the account you were supposedly opening. I hung up, paced my apartment, and tried to calm my racing thoughts. This wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was fraud. Kyle had crossed a line, and my parents were enabling it, maybe even cheering him on. Not 30 minutes later, my mom called again, voice sugary sweet like nothing had happened the night before. Justin, sweetheart, I talked to your father. We think the best thing is for you to just co-sign for Kyle. It'll save everyone the trouble. He's been through so much lately. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to scream, but something in me refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. You mean the trouble of committing fraud? I finally said, my tone flat. There was silence on the other end for a moment before Mom snapped. Don't be dramatic. Kyle was just trying to help you understand how serious this is. You're being selfish. That word again. Selfish. It hit me like a slap. I thought of the years I'd spent covering their emergencies, driving home from college on weekends just to mow the lawn so Dad wouldn't have to, paying for Mom's car repairs when she said she was short this month. And now I was selfish? I hung up before she could say anything else. The next few days were a blur of escalation. Kyle posted passive-aggressive memes on Facebook about brothers who don't care about family, tagging me in some of them. My dad sent me a long email calling me immature and vindictive, and accusing me of tearing the family apart for something as small as money. I kept packing, but the worst was still to come. The night before my movers were scheduled to arrive, I got a group text from Mom. Family meeting tomorrow 6 p.m. Non-negotiable. I didn't reply. At exactly 6 the next day, just as the movers were hauling my couch out of the apartment, my parents and Kyle showed up again, this time with my dad leading the charge. He didn't even say hello. What is wrong with you? He barked, stepping into my half-empty apartment like he owned the place. Dad, no, he interrupted, jabbing a finger at me. You think you can just walk away from your responsibilities? You think you can leave this family in shambles while you run off to play expat somewhere? You're not a child, Justin. You don't get to abandon your brother. I could feel my jaw tightening, my nails digging into my palms. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said quietly. I'm just not your doormat anymore. Kyle rolled his eyes dramatically. You're overreacting. It's just a cosign. Literally, just a signature. You make good money. Why are you being so difficult? Because I don't trust you, I said, locking eyes with him. And judging by the attempted credit line in my name, I was right not to. Mom gasped. You had no right to snoop into that. I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that surprised even me. Snoop? They called me Mom. Because apparently, my brother can't even commit fraud properly. The room went quiet for a beat. Dad's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. Watch your tone, he growled. You don't speak to your mother like that. She doesn't get to defend fraud. I shot back. For a moment, no one said anything. The movers carried another box past us, glancing nervously at the tension crackling in the air. Finally, Dad said, if you walk out that door, Don't bother coming back. It should have hurt more than it did. But all I felt was this strange, calm clarity, like I'd been holding my breath for years and was finally exhaling. I wasn't planning to, I said simply. Kyle muttered something under his breath, something about me being a failure, and I saw Mom put a hand on his arm, like she was afraid he'd push it too far. Let's just go, she said finally, voice tight. We can figure this out without him. As they left, Dad slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The apartment was suddenly silent again, except for the sound of the movers loading the last few boxes into the truck. That night, I sat on the bare floor of my apartment, eating cold pizza straight from the box and thinking about how things had gotten to this point. There had always been favoritism, the extra Christmas gifts for Kyle, the way my parents always took his side no matter what, but this was something else entirely. This was deliberate, malicious even. The next morning, I woke up to find that my email inbox had exploded. My parents had copied me on a thread they'd sent to the entire extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, accusing me of financially abandoning Kyle and breaking the family apart. Some of the replies were sympathetic, but a few of my relatives jumped in to lecture me, saying I should step up as the older brother and remember blood is thicker than water. It felt like I was being put on trial, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. If anything, their desperation just made me sure that I was doing the right thing. But then Kyle did something I couldn't have predicted. He showed up at my work. I was in the middle of my final team meeting when the receptionist pinged me on Slack. Hey, there's a guy here asking for you. Says he's your brother. I stepped out into the lobby, and there he was, looking smug, arms crossed, like he'd just caught me doing something wrong. We need to talk, he said loudly enough that people turned their heads. I grabbed his arm and steered him outside. What are you doing here? I hissed. He smirked. You wouldn't answer your phone. So I figured I'd bring the message to you. This is your last chance. Co-sign the loan, or Mom and Dad are cutting you out for good. Something in me snapped. Good, I said, my voice calm but icy. Do it. His smirk faltered for just a second, but he quickly recovered. You'll regret this. I watched him walk away, my hands trembling, not from fear this time, from adrenaline. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to play defense anymore. Because at that moment, I realized they still thought they had power over me. And maybe they did, but not for much longer. The night after Kyle showed up at my office, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, the smug look on his face, the way he said, "You'll regret this," like it was a promise. I had this uneasy feeling in my gut, not fear exactly, but anticipation, like standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting for the ground to give way. 2 days later, it did. I came home from running errands to find a letter taped to my apartment door. At first, I thought it was just another notice from my landlord about my move-out inspection. But when I tore it open, my stomach sank. It was from my bank, an official notice that a wire transfer had been initiated from my savings account. I dropped everything and sprinted inside, grabbing my laptop and logging into my online banking. The transfer was real, $7,500 sent to an account I didn't recognize. I called the bank immediately, panic making my voice shake. After 30 minutes on hold and 3 transfers between departments, they told me the account belonged to a joint holder and that the transfer had been initiated in person. I felt the blood drain from my face. A joint holder. There was only one person who still had access to that account, Kyle. Years ago, when I was in college, my parents had convinced me to add him as a backup signatory just in case something ever happened to you. I never thought about it again. Now he had walked into the bank and stolen my money, legally. I sat there in stunned silence as the banker politely explained that there was nothing they could do since it was a shared account. My voice cracked when I asked, "Can you at least tell me what the withdrawal memo said?" There was a pause, and then the banker said, "It just says family loan repayment." Family loan repayment. My brother had stolen from me and labeled it like I owed him money. When I confronted my parents that night over the phone, I was shaking so hard I almost dropped the device. He took $7,500 from me. I shouted. Mom didn't miss a beat. He told us. And frankly, Justin, you should be proud of him for finally taking some initiative to solve his problems. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Proud of him? He stole from me. You gave him access, Dad said flatly. It's not stealing if you gave permission. That permission was 10 years ago. I shot back. He was supposed to use it only in an emergency. "This is an emergency," Mom said, her voice rising. "Your brother is on the verge of losing his home because of your stubbornness." I felt something inside me snap. "No, Mom. He's on the verge of losing his home because he quit his job and refuses to take responsibility for anything. And you are enabling him." She went quiet for a moment, then said coldly, "If you're so worried about money, maybe you shouldn't be wasting it moving to another country. Stay here and work this out like a man." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Like a man. As if moving overseas for a better job, one that would double my salary and open new doors for my career, wasn't manly enough. As if my entire life's worth was measured by how much I could sacrifice for Kyle. I hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, things escalated again. I got an email from my landlord saying that my lease had been terminated early at the request of a family member. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. But when I called the office, they confirmed that someone claiming to be my co-signer had come in and filed the paperwork. "I don't have a co-signer," I said through gritted teeth. "Well, this person had all the documents," the property manager said nervously. "Your lease, your ID number. They even had a copy of your driver's license." I nearly dropped the phone. I knew exactly who had access to that kind of information: my parents. By the time I drove to the leasing office in person, it was too late. The termination had already been processed, my security deposit flagged for refund, and the apartment listed online as available immediately. I sat in my car outside the leasing office, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They were actively sabotaging my life now, not just guilt-tripping or pressuring me, but tearing down everything I had built. That night, as I packed the last of my belongings into boxes, Kyle showed up again. This time, he didn't knock. He just let himself in using the spare key my parents still had. "You have to stop this," he said, like I was the one causing trouble. I stood up so fast the chair nearly tipped over. "Stop this. You stole from me. You canceled my lease. You're trying to ruin my life." He shrugged, leaning against the doorway like he owned the place. "You brought this on yourself. If you'd just signed the loan paperwork, none of this would have happened. Mom and Dad said it was the only way to get through to you." I felt my hands trembling. Not from fear this time, but from sheer rage. "Get out," I said quietly. He smirked. "Or what? You'll call the cops? Go ahead. Tell them you gave me permission to use the account." I walked to the door, opened it, and pointed outside. "Out. Now." He held my gaze for a moment, then laughed. Actually laughed, as he strolled past me. "You'll cave eventually. You always do." When the door clicked shut behind him, I sank onto the floor, my chest heaving. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't feel sad. I felt cold, like something inside me had turned to stone. The next morning, I changed every lock, every password, and closed every account that still had Kyle's name on it. I filed a report with the bank, not because I expected them to fix it, but because I wanted a paper trail. And then I called HR at my job and asked them to move my start date overseas up by 2 weeks. If I stayed here any longer, I knew they'd find another way to sabotage me. 2 days later, I got one last blow, an email from my cousin, who apparently thought he was helping. It was a screenshot of the family group chat I'd been removed from. "Dad, he's lost. We did what we could. If he ends up broke and alone, that's on him. Mom, don't talk to him until he apologizes and signs the papers. Kyle, he will. He's not strong enough to last without us." I stared at those words for a long time, then closed the email. Something about seeing it written out like that, their complete confidence that I would eventually crawl back, lit a fire in me. Because if there's one thing I've always been, it's stubborn. And if they thought I'd break, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about freedom, about taking my life back, piece by piece, and making sure they could never do this to me again. The morning after reading that group chat screenshot, I woke up in an apartment that didn't feel like mine anymore. Half-packed boxes were stacked everywhere, the couch was gone, and the air felt heavy, stale, like even the walls were holding their breath. I sat there in the quiet for a long time, staring at the floor. It hit me all at once. I didn't really have a home anymore. Not here, not with them. Even when I'd been living here comfortably, I'd still been tethered to them by 1,000 invisible threads, shared bills, emergency phone calls, guilt trips disguised as family favors. Now those threads had been burned one by one, and I was sitting in the ashes, wondering if I'd done the right thing by lighting the match. I'll admit it, part of me wanted to give in. To just sign the stupid loan papers, swallow my pride, and have peace again. To be invited back into the group chat, to get the good son pat on the head, to pretend like nothing had happened. But every time that thought crept in, I pictured Kyle's smirk as he walked out of my apartment. "You'll cave eventually." That line was like gasoline on a fire. I went through my day like a ghost after that. I still had 2 weeks left at my job before flying out, but even work felt different now. I stopped talking much in meetings. Coworkers would ask me how things were going, and I'd just shrug, offering some vague, "Oh, you know, busy." Because how do you casually explain that your own family is trying to financially kneecap you? At night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me sit up, half expecting to see Kyle at my door again, demanding something. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The years of sacrifices, the little moments where I'd brushed off their favoritism because that's just how family is. It was like watching a movie of my own life, but finally seeing all the plot holes, all the places I should have spoken up, but didn't. The worst moment came a few days later, when I went to grab a coffee on my lunch break and ran into my aunt. She gave me that pitying look, the one that says they've already chosen a side. "Justin, sweetheart," she said, placing a hand on my arm. "You know your parents are just doing what's best for Kyle, right? He's younger. He needs more help. You're older. You can handle things on your own." I nodded politely and mumbled something about being late, but inside I was screaming. Why was it always on me to handle everything? When did being the older sibling become a lifetime contract to clean up someone else's messes? That night, sitting on the bare floor with a half-eaten sandwich beside me, I felt the weight of everything pressing down at once. I hadn't heard from any relatives except that one aunt. My parents hadn't texted in 3 days, which was almost worse than when they were bombarding me. The silence felt like exile. I'll be honest, that was my lowest point. I felt completely cut off, like I'd lost my family and was losing myself too. For a moment, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I really was selfish. Maybe I should have just kept paying for everything and avoided this mess. But then I looked around my apartment. The empty shelves, the boxes labeled with my name, the plane ticket confirmation sitting on the counter, and something shifted. I realized I wasn't losing myself. I was finding myself. This was the first time in years I was making decisions purely for me, not filtered through, "Will this upset Dad?" or "Does this inconvenience Kyle?" The thought was scary, but it was also liberating. The next morning, I made a list. Not of revenge plans, not yet, just a list of every single thing that still tied me to them. Joint accounts, shared logins, even the stupid streaming service my brother used every night. I spent the whole day closing them one by one, calling customer service reps, resetting passwords. Each confirmation email felt like a tiny step toward breathing again. When I finally closed the last one, I sat back in my chair and felt lighter than I had in weeks. I didn't tell my family I was leaving early. I didn't tell them anything. I stopped replying to messages altogether, stopped opening their emails. At work, I smiled more, even though I didn't feel like it. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was relief. The night before my flight, I packed the last of my things and took one last walk through the apartment. I stood in the doorway, remembering all the nights I'd sat here stressed out about bills that weren't even mine, about fixing problems that weren't mine. And for the first time, I felt no urge to fix anything. I left my keys on the counter and shut the door behind me. The airport was quiet when I arrived, that strange, hushed feeling of late-night terminals. I sat by the gate, scrolling through my phone, and saw one last text from Mom pop up. "We heard you're leaving. If you do this, you're not welcome back." I stared at it for a long time, then put my phone face down on the seat next to me. Because the truth was, I wasn't planning on going back. Somewhere over the Atlantic, as the plane hummed quietly and the cabin lights dimmed, I opened my laptop and started writing. Not an angry email, not a plea for understanding, but notes. Records. Dates, amounts, screenshots of the withdrawal, copies of the bank correspondence. If Kyle and my parents wanted to play dirty, I would be ready next time. And there would be a next time. People like them didn't just stop when they ran out of money. They got creative. I wasn't sure what my plan was yet, but I knew this much. I was done playing defense. Touching down in a new country felt like stepping into a completely different life. And in a way, it was. The first thing I noticed was the air. It was crisp, cold, and smelled faintly of the sea, nothing like the heavy, stale air back home. The cab ride to my new apartment was quiet, just the hum of the tires on wet pavement and the soft glow of streetlights flashing by. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders unclenched. My new place wasn't fancy, just a one-bedroom near the city center with plain white walls and a view of the rooftops. But it was mine. No spare keys floating around in other people's pockets. No one else's name on the lease. No passive-aggressive post, it's on the fridge reminding me to pick up something for someone else. The first night, I sat on the floor eating takeout from a little shop downstairs, listening to the sounds of a new city outside my window. It was quiet, not the kind of silence that felt like punishment, but the kind that felt like possibility. The job itself was better than I expected. My new team actually respected me, not just for my technical skills, but for my ideas. On my second week, I proposed a new process to streamline a system they'd been struggling with for months, and by Friday my manager was congratulating me in front of the entire department. That small moment lit something up in me. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be appreciated without strings attached. I started throwing myself into the work, late nights at the office, coffee-fueled brainstorming sessions, slowly earning a reputation as the go-to problem solver. The paycheck reflected it too. The overseas salary, combined with a generous relocation bonus, meant I was saving more than I ever had before. I opened new accounts, this time with nobody else's name on them, and began building a financial cushion. It was addicting, watching my savings grow. Every deposit felt like a brick in the wall I was building between myself and the chaos back home. But it wasn't just money. I started working out again, something I hadn't done seriously since college. At first it was just morning runs along the river, but soon I joined a local gym. There was something therapeutic about pushing weight around, feeling my body get stronger as my mind got clearer. I made friends too, real friends, not just people who tolerated me because I was useful. My coworkers invited me out for drinks after work, and one of them, a guy named Theo, became my closest friend in the city. He was blunt in that way only new friends can be. "You don't talk about your family much," he said one night over beers. I hesitated, then told him everything. All of it. The loan, the fraud, the sabotage. He just whistled low when I finished. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "that's not a family. That's a hostile takeover." I laughed harder than I had in months. It was around that time that my parents tried to reach out again. I got an email from my dad, full of clipped sentences. "We need to talk. Kyle is in trouble. Call us." I didn't reply. Instead, I kept building. I started taking on freelance work on the side, funneling the extra income into investments. By month 3, I had more in my emergency fund than I'd ever had in my life. By month 6, I'd completely rebuilt my credit profile, removing Kyle's old access permissions and freezing my credit reports back home. That was when I got the first taste of poetic justice. I got a letter from the bank notifying me that someone had attempted to open another account in my name and had been denied. I smiled, imagining Kyle's face when the clerk told him, "Sorry, sir, we can't process this without the primary account holder's authorization." By then, I'd stopped checking the family group chat screenshots my cousin occasionally sent me. They were all variations of the same thing. Mom complaining that I'd abandoned them. Dad saying I needed to grow up. Kyle posting his usual dramatic one-liners. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was amused. Because while they were busy trying to guilt-trip me, I was leveling up. By the end of my first year abroad, I'd been promoted. The raise was substantial, enough that I could finally start thinking long-term. I opened a retirement account, started building a stock portfolio, even looked at buying property. And then something unexpected happened. Opportunity came knocking. Through work, I got connected to a small startup looking for investors. Their product was brilliant, and thanks to my new savings, I could afford to buy in early. I ran the numbers, did the research, and took the leap. 3 months later, the startup landed a major contract, and my investment doubled. That was the moment it clicked. For years, I'd been pouring money into black holes. Family emergencies, unpaid debts, Kyle's endless disasters, and getting nothing back. Now, for the first time, I was putting my resources into something that paid me back tenfold. I sat there staring at the notification from my investment app, a slow smile spreading across my face. I was no longer the family fixer. I was the guy with options. And that's when the phone calls started again. First from Mom, tearful this time. "Justin, your brother is in a lot of trouble. He's being sued. He needs help." I listened, then hung up. Then from Dad, angrier. "You think this is funny? Your brother's future is on the line." I didn't even answer. And then a message from Kyle himself, the first direct contact since the day he'd laughed in my apartment. "You win. Congratulations. But you're going to regret letting this happen." I stared at the message for a long time, then closed my phone and went back to my work. Because by then, I had something they didn't know about. Leverage. Between the financial records I'd saved, the proof of the unauthorized transfer, and the trail of attempted credit applications, I had everything I needed to turn the tables if I wanted to. I wasn't sure when or how I'd use it yet, but the day was coming. And when it did, I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make sure they could never put me in that position again. The moment I realized I had leverage, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. For months I had been on the defensive, reacting, dodging, surviving, but now the balance was shifting. I wasn't rushing into anything, though. This wasn't about screaming matches or impulsive payback. If I was going to strike back, it had to be clean, thought out, permanent. I started by organizing every scrap of evidence I had. It became my late-night ritual. After work, I'd sit at my kitchen table with my laptop, headphones in, and pull everything into a single folder. Screenshots of bank statements, PDF copies of credit alerts, even my old chat logs with Mom and Dad. I highlighted dates, underlined names. Piece by piece, I built a timeline, a clear picture of how my family had escalated from asking for help to sabotaging my life. The more I pieced it together, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just one bad decision. It was a pattern, a years-long cycle of entitlement and manipulation that I had kept alive by saying yes over and over. One night, while combing through old emails, I found something that made me stop cold. It was a scanned copy of the emergency access form for the bank account Kyle had drained. My parents had signed as witnesses. Not illegal, but it was clear they had been in on it from the beginning. I sat back, staring at the screen. They hadn't just enabled him after the fact. They had been part of the plan to keep me financially exposed, probably from the day I opened that account. That was when I knew this wasn't just going to be about getting my money back. It was going to be about taking back control of my name, my credit, my future, everything they had tried to weaponize. Around this time, my life overseas was hitting a new peak. The startup I had invested in was taking off faster than anyone expected, and my early buy-in meant my shares were worth nearly triple what I'd put in. My boss noticed how calm I was under pressure and offered me a leadership position. Suddenly, I was managing a team, traveling to conferences, and speaking on panels about project strategy. At one of those conferences, I met a lawyer who specialized in cross-border finance and identity protection. Over drinks, I casually asked him what someone could do if a family member had abused their access to a shared account. His answer was music to my ears. If you can prove malicious intent, you can not only recover the funds but pursue damages, especially if they tried to use your credit without consent. That night, I hired him. We started with a full audit of every account I'd had since college. It was eye-opening. There were transactions I'd never seen before, small withdrawals here and there that I'd never noticed because I was too busy working and paying bills to look closely. By the time the lawyer was done, the total Kyle had siphoned off over the years was nearly $15,000. That's not counting what they cost you in lease termination fees and credit damage, my lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. If we go after them, we can make this more than just repayment. We can make it sting. For the first time in a long time, I smiled a real smile. But I didn't rush to file anything. Instead, I took my time building a case so airtight that even my parents couldn't twist it into a misunderstanding. I got written statements from the bank clerks who had seen Kyle come in to make the withdrawals. I gathered screenshots of every attempt they'd made to open credit in my name. I even had a copy of the email where Mom had admitted they needed to get through to me. Proof of intent. While I built the case, I kept my silence. I didn't respond to calls, didn't rise to bait in the family group chat, which, thanks to my cousin, I still had eyes on. They thought I was still sulking, which was perfect. Then came the break I hadn't expected. One morning, Theo, my friend and coworker, dropped by my office with a grin. "You'll never believe who I ran into at the coffee shop," he said. "Some guy complaining about his business partner running off with his money. He mentioned your hometown." I frowned. "My hometown? Who?" Guy's name was Mark. Said he'd partnered with someone named Kyle on a sneaker resale venture, but the guy flaked on payments. Sounded like he's considering legal action. I felt a slow, cold satisfaction creep in. Of course Kyle was still running his little schemes. Of course he was burning bridges back home, just like he'd done with me. Later that night, I tracked Mark down through LinkedIn and sent him a polite message. Within a day, he called me, and what he told me nearly made me laugh out loud. Kyle had taken $20,000 from him as an investment in a new sneaker shop, then used most of it to pay off overdue rent and car payments. The business never materialized. Mark had been trying to get answers for months, but kept getting excuses. I asked him if he had documentation, contracts, receipts, messages. He did. With his permission, I sent copies to my lawyer. This strengthens your case, the lawyer said immediately. It shows a clear pattern of financial misconduct. If we tie it together, it'll be very hard for them to claim ignorance. At this point, I wasn't just planning to recover my money. I was starting to think bigger. What if I could put a permanent stop to Kyle's ability to do this to anyone else? What if I could make sure the next person he targeted saw him for what he really was before handing over a dime? The idea of exposing the whole mess, not out of spite, but as a way of protecting other people, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt before. This wasn't just revenge. It was accountability. I kept gathering, quietly, methodically. I pulled credit reports, court records, even screenshots of Kyle's social media posts bragging about leveling up his life, posts that didn't match the reality of his financial disaster. By the time I was done, I had a dossier that painted the full picture: the fraud, the theft, the lies. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. Because the thing about revenge is that timing matters. You don't just fire off everything at once. You wait until they're comfortable, convinced that you've moved on, maybe even smug enough to think they've won. And sure enough, the next message I got from my mom suggested exactly that. Justin, we've decided to forgive you. Your brother is willing to let bygones be bygones if you'll come home for Christmas this year. I stared at that message for a long time, then set my phone down slowly. Forgive me. They thought I needed their forgiveness. That was the moment I knew it was time to stop waiting and start setting things in motion. I didn't answer my mom's message right away. I let it sit there, glowing on my phone screen like bait. If they thought they were forgiving me, they'd be lulled into believing the war was over. Good. Let them think that. The first step of my plan wasn't flashy. I instructed my lawyer to send Kyle a formal demand letter. It was calm, professional, and devastatingly specific. It listed the $7,500 withdrawal, the attempted credit applications, and the evidence we had that he'd used my information without permission. It included screenshots, dates, and statements from bank employees. It gave him 2 weeks to repay me in full, plus legal fees, or face a civil suit. I didn't send it from my personal email. It came directly from the law firm's letterhead. Clean, official, impossible to ignore. The reaction was immediate. 3 days later, I got a frantic voicemail from Mom, her voice shaking. Justin, what is this? A lawsuit? You can't sue your own brother. Take it back before you ruin his life. I didn't reply. Instead, I doubled down. With my lawyer's help, I filed an official fraud report with the credit bureau. That flagged the attempted credit line in my name and locked Kyle out of trying again. From now on, anytime he so much as tried to apply for credit using my name or SSN, it would trigger an alert to me. Then, with Mark's blessing, we filed a joint complaint to the state's Small Business Association, attaching every piece of documentation about the failed sneaker venture. That complaint automatically opened an investigation into Kyle's use of investor funds. The beauty of it all was that I wasn't shouting, wasn't threatening. I was quiet, surgical, letting the system do the heavy lifting. While the paperwork churned in the background, I worked on the social side of my revenge. Remember my cousin who had been sending me family chat screenshots? I sent him a single, very polite message. Hey, thanks for keeping me in the loop. If the family asks, don't mention anything about what I'm doing. Just tell them I'm focusing on work and might come home for the holidays. He agreed, and within days, I could see in the group chat screenshots that my parents were practically giddy. Dad, I think he's finally coming around. Knew he just needed time. Mom, this will be the Christmas we put the family back together. Kyle, yeah, sure, can't wait. I smiled reading that. Because when Christmas came, they were going to get something. Just not what they expected. 2 weeks later, right on schedule, Kyle's lawyer responded to the demand letter. It was full of bluster at first, claims that he had implied permission, that it was family money, that I was being malicious. My lawyer responded with a quiet, deadly calm. Provide documentation supporting your claim of implied permission. They had nothing. At the same time, the Small Business Association sent me a notice that they had opened a formal case against Kyle for misuse of investment funds. I didn't have to lift a finger, just forward Mark's documentation when requested. I didn't tell my family about any of this. Instead, I waited until December rolled around and then sent a single message to the group chat. I'll be home for Christmas. Can't wait to catch up. The reaction was exactly what I'd hoped. Mom sent heart emojis. Dad wrote, "Finally. Good to hear you've come to your senses." Even Kyle dropped a sarcastic yay, but I could tell they thought they'd won. I booked the ticket, packed a single bag, and boarded the plane with a folder full of documents, printed evidence of everything. The bank statements, the credit reports, the complaint filings, and even a notarized statement from my lawyer outlining the damages we were prepared to pursue if Kyle refused to settle. When I landed, I didn't go straight home. I went to the bank first and officially removed Kyle as a joint holder on the last remaining account. Then I opened a new account, moved every remaining dollar into it, and closed the old one entirely. By the time I left the branch, there was no way anyone but me could touch my money ever again. Christmas Eve, I showed up at my parents' house just as the whole family was gathering. Mom hugged me like nothing had ever happened. Dad clapped me on the back and said, "Good to have you back, son." I smiled politely and said, "Good to be back." Kyle was on the couch, scrolling on his phone. He barely looked up at me. Dinner was exactly what I expected. Cheerful small talk, a few tense jokes at my expense, a few digs about me finally coming to my senses. I just smiled and ate my food, letting them feel comfortable. When dessert was served, I stood up, cleared my throat, and set a folder on the table. "I have something to share," I said. The room went quiet. "This," I said, opening the folder, "is a full record of every unauthorized withdrawal made from my account over the last few years. This," I said, flipping to the next page, "is proof of attempted credit fraud in my name. And this," I laid down the final document, "is the formal complaint filed against you, Kyle, for misuse of investor funds." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mom gasped. "Justin, what are you doing?" "Protecting myself," I said calmly. Dad's face darkened. "This is ridiculous. We can work this out as a family." "No," I interrupted, my voice steady. "I tried to work it out as a family. You sabotaged my lease. You stole from me. You tried to force me into debt. Those aren't family decisions. Those are hostile actions. So now we do this the proper way." Kyle stood up, red-faced. "You can't do this." "I already did," I said, sliding the settlement offer across the table. "Pay me back, in full, by the date listed, or this goes to court. And just so you know, the state is already looking into your sneaker scheme. You might want to start saving for a lawyer." The room exploded after that. Mom crying, Dad shouting, Kyle calling me every name he could think of. I just stood there, calm, collected, letting them rage. Because for once, I was the one in control. When they finally quieted down, I said, "You have 2 weeks. If I don't hear from your lawyer, I'll see you in court." Then I picked up my bag and walked out, leaving them all staring at the documents on the table. I didn't look back as I walked out of the house. The December air was icy, but it felt clean on my face, like I'd just stepped out of a smoky room. My hands were steady as I unlocked my rental car. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control, not just of my money, but of my life. I flew back the next morning, leaving my parents and Kyle to stew in the wreckage of that Christmas dinner. I expected silence after that, but within days, the calls started again. First Mom, tearful, apologetic this time. "Justin," she said, her voice cracking, "you can't really mean this. You'd destroy your brother's future over a misunderstanding." I didn't raise my voice. "Mom, this isn't a misunderstanding. It's theft, fraud, and harassment. If you want this to go away, have him pay me back. If not, we go to court." She tried guilt. "What will the neighbors think? The family? That's not my problem anymore." I hung up. 3 days later, Kyle's lawyer reached out again, this time with a very different tone. They wanted to settle. We negotiated through my attorney, and in the end, Kyle had to pay back every cent he'd taken, plus my legal fees. When the transfer cleared, I stared at the notification on my phone and felt a strange mix of relief and vindication. But the fallout was only beginning. Word spread through the extended family about what had happened. At first, my parents tried to spin it, saying I had overreacted and humiliated them. But then my lawyer sent them a formal notice about their role in the lease termination, accompanied by copies of the paperwork they had filed using my personal information. That shut them up fast. By February, Kyle's sneaker investor had filed his own suit. Because I had shared documentation with him, his case moved quickly, and within months Kyle had a judgment against him for repayment. His car was repossessed shortly after. I heard through my cousin that Kyle had to move back in with my parents. The house that had once felt like their kingdom was suddenly a pressure cooker. 3 people trapped together, all pointing fingers. They fight all the time now, my cousin reported one night over video chat. Your dad says Kyle ruined the family's reputation. Your mom says you betrayed them. And Kyle? Well, Kyle just keeps blaming you for everything. I smiled at that. Good. Let him blame me. Maybe it'll keep him from trying this on someone else. Life overseas kept getting better. I got another promotion, bought a condo with cash from my investment gains, and started building a circle of friends who felt more like family than my actual relatives ever had. I even started mentoring new hires at work, helping them navigate career paths, something I wished I'd had when I was younger. Every so often, my parents would send a message, not angry anymore, but almost pleading. We'd like to talk. Can we put this behind us? Your brother is struggling. He's not himself. Each time, I sent the same reply. I hope you get the help you need. I've moved on. Eventually, the messages stopped. A year later, I was invited to speak at a major conference in my industry. As I stood on stage, looking out at the packed room, I thought about how far I'd come, from sitting on a bare apartment floor, feeling like I'd lost everything, to this moment. After the talk, I went back to my hotel room and saw a single unread message on my phone. It was from Dad. We sold the house. Just thought you should know. That was it. No apology, no attempt to reconnect. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the message. Then I typed a single reply. Good. Maybe now you'll stop trying to live off me. And I put my phone down for the last time. Because here's the thing about walking away. Once you finally do it, once you stop begging for scraps of love and respect, you realize how light it feels to never turn back. I didn't just win. I ended the game entirely. And that was the last time they had any power over me. My name's Julian, I'm 29, and if there's one thing I've learned from being part of my family, it's that they never miss an opportunity to remind you of where you supposedly fall on the totem pole. I'm the youngest by several years, the only one without a spouse, a mortgage, or, in their words, a respectable LinkedIn profile. I work freelance, mostly graphic design and a little copywriting when it comes my way. It's enough to pay rent on my apartment, keep my fridge stocked, and even tuck some savings away, but none of that ever seemed to matter to them. Not when my sister Lauren has a high-rise condo with a view of the skyline, or when my brother Matt closes sales deals worth 6 figures and still somehow finds time to train for marathons. In comparison, I might as well be the family dog, tolerated, occasionally acknowledged, but never taken seriously. Sunday dinners had become a tradition I mostly endured rather than enjoyed. Ever since Mom passed 5 years ago, Dad insisted on keeping the family bond strong, which apparently meant sitting in awkward silence while Lauren bragged about her latest interior design project or Matt ranted about corporate tax rates like he was running for office. I'd show up, bring a bottle of wine no one touched, get a few jabs thrown my way, and leave with a tight smile and an even tighter chest. But this past Sunday, it was different. We were midway through dinner, the kind where no one really talks to you, but somehow your entire life still ends up under scrutiny. Lauren had just finished showing everyone a slideshow on her phone of potential cruise outfits. Yes, actual outfits, organized by theme. When Dad cleared his throat and said, "We all voted, and we've decided you're not coming on the cruise." I blinked. What? Lauren grinned, sipping her wine like she'd just delivered a performance. It's adults only. You know, for people with real jobs. I chuckled softly, more out of disbelief than amusement. Right? Because a 29-year-old paying his own bills doesn't count. Even Grandma, sweet, crocheting, always has peppermints in her purse. Grandma chimed in from across the table, shaking her head. Maybe next year, dear, if you finally do something with your life. I looked at her, stunned. This was the same woman who used to sneak me cookies before dinner, who once knitted me a beanie because she thought my ears looked cold. Now she was parroting Lauren's digs like they were gospel. I see, I muttered, forcing a smile as I pushed back from the table. Excuse me for a moment. I stood and walked out into the front yard, phone in hand. It was cool outside, the kind of crisp air that wakes you up. I paced along the porch and let the sting of their words settle somewhere deep, in that part of your chest you try not to acknowledge. I didn't cry, I was past that, but I did feel that quiet, hollow ache. Not just from being left out, but from realizing this wasn't new. It had been this way for years. I was the afterthought, the disappointment, the guy they all assumed would one day come crawling for help or money or validation. Except the cruise that I was part of, at least financially. What none of them knew, what no one had ever bothered to ask, was that 3 months ago, Lauren had called me in a panic. Julian, listen, I'm booking this amazing cruise for the whole family as a surprise for Dad's birthday. It's through this luxury line, and I want to lock in the group rate. But my bonus hasn't hit yet, and I need someone to float it temporarily, just a deposit. I swear I'll pay you back in 2 weeks. She'd sounded so flustered, so sincere, and against my better judgment, I said yes. I still had the receipt, still had the confirmation email, still had the credit card charge sitting on my account, because, of course, Lauren never paid me back. Not a single cent. Every time I brought it up, she'd laugh and say, "Oh, I thought you were cool with it. You did offer, right?" Technically, yes. I offered, but not for her to pretend it never happened. Not for them to now turn around and tell me I wasn't welcome on the very trip I had made possible. I stood under the porch light, staring at my screen, scrolling through the old messages, rereading her cheerful tone, and watching my fingers hover over the cancellation button. One tap, that's all it would take. The reservation was still in my name. The card was still mine. I didn't press it. Not yet. Instead, I walked back inside, sat down at the table, and stayed silent as they continued planning their adults-only vacation. They talked about excursions in Belize, snorkeling in Cozumel, booking spa packages and drink packages and room upgrades. They even laughed about how chill it was going to be without any dead weight tagging along. "Don't take it personally," Matt said as he speared another piece of steak. "You'll get your chance to come, eventually." "Yeah," Lauren added with a smirk, "when you level up." I smiled, nodded, said nothing. But inside, a slow fire had started to burn. By the time dessert rolled around, a store-bought pie I'd brought and they hadn't touched, I excused myself again, this time for real. I hugged Grandma. She patted my arm like she was consoling a child. "Don't feel bad, honey. Maybe this'll be the push you need." I didn't say what I wanted to say. I didn't scream about the hypocrisy, or demand repayment, or throw the pie in someone's smug face. Instead, I got in my car, drove home, sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, pulled up the cruise website, and looked at the reservation again. Everything was still editable. The whole trip was booked under my name. The guests were listed as added travelers. My card had paid for the deposit and the upgrades. All I had to do was one click. But I didn't click it yet. I waited. I waited until 2 days later, when Lauren posted a picture of matching cruise outfits for the whole family on Instagram, with the caption, "1 week to paradise. #FamilyGoals, #CruiseCrew." I waited until Matt texted me, out of nowhere, asking if I could help him with some last-minute travel insurance documents since I had more time. And then I waited until Friday evening, when the group chat, "Family Cruise 2025. Party Popper ship," lit up with messages about luggage tags, airport transfers, and dinner reservations on the ship. And that's when I pressed the button, "Cancel reservation." Just like that. All it took was one click, and the whole thing unraveled. 10 minutes later, my phone started buzzing. First it was Matt. "Dude, the cruise confirmation disappeared?" Then Lauren, "Why is the card declined? What did you do?" Then Dad, "Call me. Now." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened the group chat, typed 2 words, "Bon voyage," and hit send. The silence that followed was almost musical. No buzz, no pings, just nothing. I stared at the screen, watching those 2 words, "Bon voyage," hover above a sea of shocked silence in the family group chat. I half expected a barrage of insults, explanations, or maybe even an apology, but they were still trying to piece it together. still trying to figure out how the guy they dismissed could pull the entire rug out from under their perfect little cruise fantasy. It took about 20 minutes before my phone exploded. Lauren was the first to call. I let it ring. Then Dad. Twice in a row. I declined both. Then Matt, who left a voicemail that started calm and quickly unraveled into frustration. Julian, what is going on? This isn't funny, man. Call me back. I didn't. Instead, I sat back in my chair, stared at the wall, and let the weight of it wash over me. The thing is, I didn't feel good. Not really. I didn't feel like I'd won or proven anything. What I felt was tired. Tired of pretending I was okay with being treated like the family's punchline. Tired of showing up, giving the benefit of the doubt, and watching them twist it into another joke about how I was the disappointment. But mostly, I felt free. It was like I had finally pulled the plug on something that had been draining me for years. That night, I ordered Thai food, turned my phone on silent, and binged some old sci-fi show I barely paid attention to. I went to bed around midnight, my stomach full and my heart a strange mix of steady and hollow. Sleep didn't come easy, but it came eventually. The next morning, there were over 60 messages in the group chat. Grandma, what happened to the cruise? Dad, this is ridiculous. Julian, you better fix this. Lauren, you child. You absolute child. Matt, you ruined everything. And then this one, from Lauren again. I can't believe you would sabotage Dad's birthday like this. You're selfish. You always have been. If you were jealous, you could have just said so. Jealous? That was rich. I almost laughed. They thought this was about envy? That I ruined a luxury vacation because I wanted to be them? No, I didn't want their lives. I wanted respect. And if not that, then I at least wanted distance from their garbage. Still, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I checked the peephole and sighed. Dad. He was wearing his usual Sunday casual, jeans, polo tucked in, sleeves rolled up like he was ready to fix something. I considered not answering, but I didn't feel like turning this into a game of hide and seek. I opened the door, leaning against the frame. Julian, he said, frowning. Dad, can we talk? I shrugged. We're already doing it. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing around like he expected a camera crew to jump out. Look, whatever you're mad about, can we not do this here? I stared at him. Where would you like to do it? On the cruise I wasn't invited to. He exhaled hard. You know that wasn't personal. It was literally personal. It was a group decision. Right? I said, crossing my arms. Just like it was a group decision not to repay me for fronting the entire cruise in the first place. He blinked. Wait. What? I tilted my head. You didn't know? I thought Lauren paid for it. I smiled. She didn't. He stood there, stunned. His face slowly shifting from confusion to discomfort to that tight-lipped anger he always got when reality didn't match the version he'd built in his head. So you paid for the cruise and then canceled it. I nodded. That's correct. He was quiet for a moment, then said, You embarrassed us. That stopped me. I laughed, soft, bitter, and honest. Embarrassed you? You sat there at dinner and told me the family voted me out like I was being exiled. Grandma said I hadn't done anything with my life. My own sister called me a child. And I'm the one who embarrassed you. He looked down, jaw tense. I didn't cancel the cruise to make a statement. I continued. I canceled it because I realized something. If you're going to treat me like I don't belong in this family, then maybe I shouldn't be paying for the privilege to be excluded. He didn't respond. Just looked out toward the street, like that would give him the answers. After a long silence, he finally said, You could have handled this differently. So could you. He nodded slowly, then turned and walked down the steps. I didn't invite him back. I didn't apologize. I didn't ask if he still planned to go somewhere for his birthday. I just closed the door, went back inside, and sat down. The group chat fell quiet that night. No new messages. No new threats or guilt trips. Just silence. Until the next day, a new message popped up. From Lauren. No apology. No explanation. Just a screenshot of a rebooking confirmation. But this time, no mention of me. No bon voyage. Just, we're going anyway. I stared at the screenshot for a full minute before even processing it. They'd rebooked the cruise. Not rescheduled, not regrouped, just moved on. Same trip, same week, same smug attitude. The only thing missing was me. No one asked if I was okay. No one addressed the money. No one apologized. Lauren's message sat there like a challenge. "We're going anyway." I didn't reply. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. But deep down, I knew what this was: damage control. They were scrambling to preserve the image, to keep up appearances. Probably paid double for last-minute bookings and downgraded cabins. But they didn't care. The priority wasn't comfort, it was control. And making sure I knew I was out of the picture. Matt texted me privately a few hours later. "I don't agree with how they handled it. But you really blindsided everyone, man." I rolled my eyes. Did I? Or did I just stop being quiet? He didn't respond. The cruise was set to sail in 4 days. My sister posted daily countdowns on her Instagram story. Matching swimsuits, sunscreen hauls, spa appointment screenshots. The hashtag Cruise Crew 2025 was back in full swing. Only now it looked thinner, a little forced. I'd muted most of them by now, but occasionally, something would sneak through. A tag, a story, a photo from grandma with too much zoom and the caption typed out in all caps. "See you at SEA." I had to laugh. Not because it was funny, really, but because this whole thing had become absurd. Here was this group of people, clawing at the image of unity they were so desperate to uphold, while I sat in a one-bedroom apartment with a stack of freelance edits, a leftover burrito, and the undeniable knowledge that I was better off not going. Still, it stung. Not being missed. Not being wanted. The part they never understood, never even tried to understand, was that I didn't need luxury. I didn't need first-class or five-star dinners or sunset views from a balcony suite. I just wanted to belong. To feel like I mattered as much as the people I grew up with. And every time I gave them a chance to show me I did, they doubled down on showing me I didn't. I was done trying to fix that. The day before their cruise, I got one more message from Dad. "Your sister says you're still holding a refund credit from the original booking. Can you transfer it to her card?" No greeting. No question. Just a request, as if I was some office clerk processing receipts. I stared at the message. Then I opened my banking app and checked. Sure enough, there was a travel credit for $740. I thought about it. Thought about all the groceries I could buy with that. Thought about putting it toward rent. Or a plane ticket somewhere I actually wanted to go. And then I thought about what they would think if I gave it back. That I was folding. That I still played the role they'd written for me. So instead, I redeemed the credit. For myself. I booked a 3-night cabin in the mountains. Nothing fancy. A little Airbnb with a wood stove, a view of the trees, and a hiking trail nearby. No cell service. No signal. Just space. Space to think, to breathe, to be me, without the noise of people trying to shrink me into something smaller. The next morning, I watched their cruise photos roll in as I packed. Lauren posed on the dock in a sun hat that still had the price tag on it. Matt held up a margarita bigger than his head. Grandma was standing under a Bon Voyage banner, beaming. And Dad, he looked tired. Not physically, but something about his eyes. Like maybe, just maybe, the cracks were starting to show. As I zipped my duffel bag shut and turned off my phone, I smiled. They had no idea where I was going. And for the first time in a long time, neither did I. I left the city early that morning, just as the sun was rising and the cruise ship was probably boarding. No goodbyes, no phone calls, no texts. I turned my phone off and tossed it into the glove compartment like it didn't even exist. The drive to the cabin took about 5 hours. Long, winding stretches of highway melted into narrow country roads lined with pine trees and the occasional gas station that looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. By the time I arrived, it was mid-afternoon. The sky was a deep, clear blue, and the air smelled like firewood and cold soil. The cabin was perfect. Rustic, quiet, and, most importantly, completely disconnected. No Wi-Fi, no signal, just a landline for emergencies and a notebook left by the owner filled with handwritten notes about local trails, restaurants, and how to restart the water heater if it sputtered. I lit a fire in the stove, unpacked my groceries, and sat on the deck with a mug of coffee, watching the trees sway in the wind. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. It's hard to explain, but something in me began to loosen. I wasn't just taking a break from the family. I was detoxing from the years of silent expectations, backhanded comments, and polite toleration. For the first time, I wasn't performing. I wasn't adjusting my posture or tone or pretending I didn't notice when someone rolled their eyes at me. I wasn't trying to be included. I wasn't trying at all. I was just living. On the second day, I hiked a trail behind the cabin that led to a cliff overlooking a frozen lake. The view was breathtaking, and I sat on a boulder for over an hour, watching the sunlight flicker off the icy surface below. I didn't think about the crews. I didn't wonder what they were doing. I didn't imagine their dinner reservations or their fake laughter or the awkward, tension-filled breakfasts that would inevitably happen once the novelty wore off. I just breathed. It wasn't until the fourth day, my last day there, that I turned my phone back on. It buzzed for almost 3 full minutes. Voicemails, missed calls, texts, but most of all, photos. Tons and tons of photos from the cruise. Most of them from Lauren, who had apparently taken it upon herself to document every hour of the trip. There she was lounging by the pool. There was Matt flexing next to a fruit platter. Dad on a deck chair, drink in hand, looking stiff and awkward like he hated every second of it. Grandma wearing a Captain of Sass visor. And then, the tone shifted. The last few photos were blurry. A snapped photo of Matt and Lauren arguing. Another of Dad sitting alone at a dining table, glass of wine untouched. One of Grandma asleep on a chair, mouth slightly open, phone in hand like she'd fallen asleep mid-text. No captions. No hashtags. No emojis. Then came the messages. Lauren, thanks for ruining everything, Julian. This trip was a disaster. Matt, wish you were here. Not joking. It was weird without you. Grandma, call me when you get back, sweetheart. And then, Dad. His message came through later, in the evening, after I'd already started packing to leave. I've been thinking about what you said. You were right. We were wrong. And I'm sorry. I stared at that message for a long time. Not because I needed it. By that point, I really didn't. But because it was the first time my dad had said those words to me in years. The man who prided himself on being steady, logical, and never admitting fault, had finally said it. I'm sorry. The next day, I drove home. The return felt different. The city didn't look so suffocating. My apartment didn't feel so small. My life, as imperfect and unpredictable as it was, felt mine. And for the first time, that was enough. 2 weeks passed. No Sunday dinner invites. No new group chats. Just quiet. Until, one day, I got a letter in the mail. From Grandma. It was handwritten on floral stationery and smelled faintly of lavender. Inside was a short note. Dear Julian, we missed you. Truly. I let my mouth run away from me that day. I was wrong to say what I said. I'm sorry, and I hope you can forgive me. P.S. The cruise was awful. The shrimp gave me hives, and Lauren cried 3 times. Never again. Love. Grandma. I laughed. Laughed so hard I nearly cried. Then I wrote her back. Just a short letter. Told her I forgave her. Told her about the cabin. Included a Polaroid of the frozen lake and invited her to visit if she ever wanted some peace and quiet. A few days later, I got a text from Matt asking if I wanted to grab lunch. Not a group thing, just the 2 of us. I said yes. The lunch was casual. Not dramatic or heavy. Just 2 brothers catching up. He talked about work. I talked about a new freelance gig I'd picked up. Then, just as we were finishing, he said, you know, I think Lauren's more upset that she couldn't control the narrative than about the cruise itself. I nodded. That sounds about right. She'll come around, he added. Eventually. I smiled. She doesn't need to. And I meant it. The truth is, people like Lauren only come around if it benefits them. And I wasn't going to spend any more of my life waiting for her approval. Not anymore. A few months passed. Summer came. I booked another cabin stay, this time longer. I started putting more effort into my freelance business, got a few new clients, built a decent portfolio site. I even started teaching an online design course a few nights a week. It felt good to pour energy into something that gave back. Then one Sunday, out of the blue, Dad called. Dinner tonight, he asked. I hesitated. Just you. He cleared his throat. Just me. I agreed. We met at a little Italian place near his apartment. Not the big family dinner. No long table, no curated performance. Just father and son. Over pasta and a shared bottle of red. He admitted a few things I never thought I'd hear. That he regretted making me feel like the odd one out. That he'd underestimated how hard it was to build a life on your own terms. That he missed Mom more than he let on. And sometimes, in the chaos of holding everything together, he forgot to see people. Especially me. We didn't hug. That wasn't his style. But when we said goodbye, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You've grown into someone I'm proud of." And that was enough. Not a grand gesture. Not a perfect ending. But a beginning. Since then, we've built something new. Not flashy. Not loud. But real. And every now and then, I get a card from Grandma with a new knitted hat or a joke that makes no sense. Matt and I grab beers now and then. Even Lauren, well, she hasn't changed much. But I've changed enough that her barbs don't sink in anymore. I stopped chasing their acceptance. And the irony? That's when they finally started offering it. But by then, I didn't need it. I had already taken back something more important than a cruise or a seat at their table. I had taken back myself. I'm Brandon, I'm 27, and I've always been the quiet one in the family. I'm the guy who never causes a scene, never fights back when my parents start one of their lectures, and never gives them the satisfaction of knowing how much their words sting. Or at least, that's how it used to be. The night everything changed started like any other. An ordinary Sunday dinner at my parents' house, where everyone gathers around the big oak table to eat, gossip, and, inevitably, compare me to my older brother, Mark. Mark is the golden child. He's 30, married to the kind of picture-perfect woman my mother loves to brag about to her friends, and he just got promoted to senior manager at his firm. The kind of person whose accomplishments get framed and hung in the hallway. Meanwhile, I'm the one who, according to them, took too long to get his life together. It doesn't matter that I work full-time, pay my own bills, and have been covering a good chunk of their mortgage ever since Dad's hours got cut at work 3 years ago. To them, Mark is the successful one, and I'm the project they never quite finished. I usually just sit through these dinners, picking at my food and letting the conversation wash over me. But tonight, the tension was thicker than usual. My mom had made her famous pot roast, and as soon as I sat down, I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me. My brother was talking about his new SUV, something he just had to buy to match his promotion, of course, and Dad was nodding proudly, like he'd raised the perfect son. Then Dad turned to me. "So, Brandon," he said, that familiar edge in his voice, "when are you going to start making something of yourself? Maybe take some notes from your brother here." I swallowed my bite of roast and tried to keep my voice even. "I'm making something of myself, Dad. I've been working 2 jobs this year." Mom scoffed softly like I'd just made a bad joke. "You still rent, honey. You should be saving for a house by now." That one stung, mostly because the only reason I wasn't saving for a house was because I'd been quietly helping them keep this one. But of course, they never talk about that part. The conversation kept spiraling from there, my brother chiming in with unhelpful advice, Mom pointing out how I never stick with anything, and Dad finally snapping. He put his fork down, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Stop embarrassing this family and learn from your brother." I don't know what came over me, but I set my glass down, leaned back, and said, "Fine. He can cover the mortgage from now on." The room went silent. Mark blinked, confused, and Mom froze, her hand hovering in midair like she'd just seen a ghost. "What mortgage?" she asked carefully. "The house is paid off, right?" My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the bank statements I'd brought with me, just in case tonight went the way I thought it might. I slid them across the table without saying a word. Mom's face went pale as she read them, and Dad's jaw tightened. Mark looked between us, clearly lost. The air in the room felt heavy, like we were all waiting for something to explode. And that's when I saw it, just for a second, in my mom's expression. Not fear, not shock, but guilt. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. This was going to be the night everything finally came out. I just didn't know yet how ugly it was going to get. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there and let the silence stretch, my glass still in my hand, letting them squirm. Mom finally set the statements down on the table, but she didn't look at me. She was staring at Dad, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice just barely above a whisper. Dad's ears turned red, a sure sign that he was about to blow. "Because it wasn't your business," he snapped, and then, when he realized how that sounded, added quickly, "I had it under control. I didn't need anyone else sticking their nose in." Mom didn't look convinced, and neither did Mark, but they both turned their attention back to me. "Brandon," Mom said, "why would you keep this a secret? We could have figured something out as a family." That one almost made me laugh. As a family? Where was this sudden team spirit every other time I'd been drowning in bills, quietly covering for them, so they could keep living like nothing was wrong? I took a breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "I kept it a secret," I said, "because if I didn't, we'd all be having this conversation 3 years earlier, and I'd still be sitting here getting told I'm a disappointment." Except back then, we probably would have lost the house. Mark frowned. Wait, hold on. You're saying you've been paying their mortgage this whole time? Yes, I said, meeting his eyes. Half of it every month, plus utilities when they fell behind. The only reason this house is still in our family is because I worked every overtime shift I could get. For a moment, Mark actually looked stunned, like he was seeing me for the first time. But Dad just grunted, like I'd said something mildly inconvenient, and reached for his glass. Well, you live here rent-free. It's only fair you contribute. That was it. That was the match. Rent-free. I repeated, my voice sharper now. You've been treating me like a tenant this whole time, nagging me to keep the house spotless, acting like I owe you my time every time something breaks, and now I find out I've basically been paying to keep a roof over your heads. Mom tried to shush me, saying something about tone and respect, but I wasn't done. Do you have any idea what it's been like? I said, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Working double shifts, skipping nights out with my friends, saying no to everything I wanted to buy for myself, because every month I knew there was a payment due on this house. And the whole time, you two just sat back and let me be the family screw-up. You could have said no, Dad shot back. Nobody forced you. That hit me like a punch to the chest. Nobody forced me. That was the part he didn't get. Of course nobody forced me. But what was I supposed to do? Watch them lose everything? Watch my mom cry while a bank takes the house she raised us in? You're unbelievable, I said, my voice low now, because I could feel my anger shifting into something colder. I've been saving your reputation, not embarrassing it. And you've been using me as your punching bag. For the first time, Mom looked guilty, really guilty. She reached across the table like she wanted to take my hand, but I pulled back. Mark cleared his throat and said, Look, maybe we can just calm down. No, I think we should finally talk about this, I interrupted. Because I'm done being the quiet one. And that's when it all started pouring out. Mom started talking about how stressful it had been for them to keep up appearances, how their friends would have talked if they'd known they were struggling, and how grateful they were. Though she didn't seem very grateful now for my help. But she quickly turned it around, saying, You should have told us you were feeling this way sooner. You know how we worry about you. You shut us out, Brandon. I almost laughed again. You worry about me? Mom, you've spent every family dinner for the past 5 years comparing me to Mark. Every single one. I can quote half the things you say by heart. Mark just got another promotion. Mark just bought a house. Mark and Lisa are trying for a baby. Do you know what it feels like to sit here and hear about everything he's doing right, while you act like my life is one long failure? Mark shifted uncomfortably. Bran. No, let him say it, Dad said, crossing his arms. You want me to say it? I asked. Fine. I feel like I'm just your safety net. I'm good enough to write a check when you're in trouble, but never good enough to make you proud. And I'm tired of pretending it doesn't bother me. The table was dead silent. Mom looked like she wanted to cry, but she didn't. Dad looked furious. And Mark actually looked ashamed, which surprised me. Then Dad said, Maybe if you were more like your brother, we wouldn't be in this situation. There it was. The line that sent everything over the edge. Maybe if you were more like a father, I shot back, you wouldn't have let it get this bad in the first place. That did it. Dad slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. Watch your mouth. But I didn't flinch this time. Or what? I asked, and this time my voice was calm. You can't take anything from me. You already took 3 years of my life. Mark finally stepped in, telling Dad to cool off, but it was too late. The dam had broken. Mom got up from the table, muttering about how she couldn't do this right now, and Dad stormed off to the living room. I stayed seated, my hands still gripping the table, my pulse hammering. Mark lingered behind. Brandon, he said quietly, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know you were doing all that. I know you didn't, I said. It's not about you, Mark. It never was. But you let them use you as the yardstick, and it's been killing me. He nodded slowly, like he finally got it. What are you going to do, he asked. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know yet. All I knew was that I wasn't going to sit at that table again, silently taking it. When I left that night, I didn't say goodbye. I just grabbed my jacket and walked out. But as I drove home, the anger started to settle into something sharper, something that felt like resolve. Because if they thought tonight was bad, they had no idea what was coming. When I got back to my apartment that night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying everything that had been said at the table, The way Dad's jaw clenched, the way Mom avoided my eyes, the way Mark just sat there absorbing the fallout like it wasn't hitting him too. I told myself I was done bailing them out, done playing the villain in a story I didn't write, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The next morning, I got my answer. I had just finished making coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. It wasn't payday, and I hadn't made any big purchases, so I knew something was wrong before I even opened it. My stomach dropped as I read the message. Your scheduled transfer has been processed. $1,350 withdrawn. The mortgage payment. Except I hadn't scheduled it this month. Last night was supposed to be the last time I paid for anything connected to that house. I pulled up my banking app and scrolled through the transaction details. Sure enough, it was set up as a recurring payment, one that apparently hadn't been canceled like I thought when I called the bank last week. Or maybe it had been reactivated. I stared at the screen, my pulse rising. My parents had access to my bank info because 3 years ago, when this all started, I'd set up the payments through their account and linked it to mine. It was supposed to make things easier. No late fees, no missed deadlines. I'd completely forgotten that they technically still had permission to authorize transfers. And now it looked like they had. I drove back to their house that afternoon, not even sure what I was going to say. Mark's car wasn't in the driveway, which was a small mercy. Mom opened the door when I knocked, her expression guarded, like she'd been expecting me. "Brandon," she said softly, "you should have called first." "Why?" I asked, stepping inside. "So you could make sure Dad wasn't here to answer the door?" Her lips tightened, but she didn't deny it. I went straight to the kitchen and put my phone on the counter, the transaction details pulled up on the screen. "Care to explain why money just came out of my account this morning?" She hesitated, then sighed. "We thought you might have acted out of anger last night. Your father didn't want the payment to lapse, just because you were upset." I blinked, stunned. "So you just decided to take my money anyway?" "It's for the house, Brandon," she said quickly, as if that made it better. "You've always said you didn't want us to lose it." "That was before," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Before I realized you were using me. Before I realized you'd rather let me break my back to save this place than admit we were in trouble. You had no right." She flinched, but didn't look away. "Your father is under a lot of stress right now. If the house goes into default, it will destroy his credit. And then what will happen? He can't retire. We can't sell. So you just take my money without asking?" Her face hardened. "You don't understand the pressure he's under." "No, Mom." I cut her off, my voice shaking now. "You don't understand what you've done. You stole from me. Do you get that? You went into my account and helped yourself." That's when Dad walked in from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's all this yelling about?" I turned to face him. "Did you authorize that transfer this morning?" His expression didn't even flicker. "Of course I did. Someone had to be the adult in the room." "The adult?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think being an adult means taking money from your own kid behind his back? I told you last night I was done. You don't get to decide otherwise." "It's not just your money, Brandon," he said, his tone turning sharp. "This is about family. You've always lived here, eaten our food, used our water. This is your responsibility." "No," I said, shaking my head. "That stopped being true the minute you went behind my back." "Don't be dramatic," Dad said. "It was one payment." "It's theft," I shot back. We stood there in the kitchen, staring at each other like two strangers. Mom tried to defuse it, saying something about finding another way, but I barely heard her. All I could think about was how casually he said it, how he didn't even feel bad. Then he said something that turned my anger into something darker. "You should be grateful," he said, his voice low. "Most kids don't get a chance to keep their childhood home. You'll inherit this place one day. You should want to protect it." I stared at him, my mouth dry. "Inherit it?" "Of course," he said. "Your brother has his own house now. This one will go to you, but only if it's still standing when we're gone. So yes, you're going to keep helping, whether you like it or not." And there it was. Not a request. A statement. A decision made for me without my consent. "You think you can just decide that?" I asked, my voice quiet now. Dad shrugged. "It's already decided." Something inside me shifted then. Up until that moment, I'd been angry, but some part of me had still wanted to fix things, to make them understand, to make them see me. But hearing him say it like that, like I was just an ATM with no say in my own life, flipped a switch in me. I didn't say another word. I just turned, walked out of the kitchen, and left. As I got into my car, I realized my hands were trembling. Not from anger, at least not just anger. This was something colder, sharper. A clarity I hadn't felt before. They had just made it perfectly clear. This wasn't about family, or love, or respect. It was about control. And I was done letting them have it. That night, I stayed up until 3 in the morning going through every piece of paperwork I could find. Bank statements, mortgage documents, every single receipt I'd saved since the day I started covering their payments. By the time the sun came up, I had a folder an inch thick with evidence of everything I'd contributed. I didn't know yet exactly what I was going to do with it, but one thing was certain. The next time I saw my parents, I wouldn't just be walking into their house as their son. I'd be walking in as someone they couldn't control anymore. The next few weeks were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. After that last confrontation, I cut off almost all contact with my parents. I didn't block their numbers, though I thought about it more than once, but I stopped answering their calls. When they texted me asking for an update or reminding me about the next payment deadline, I left them on read. At first, the silence felt like a relief, like finally taking a deep breath after years of being underwater. But the quiet has a way of turning on you. The apartment felt colder than usual. The walls seemed to close in every night when I came home from work, and the silence that used to feel comforting now just made me feel hollow. There was a part of me that wondered if I'd gone too far, if maybe I should have just swallowed my pride and kept things going the way they were. After all, it wasn't like I didn't want them to have a roof over their heads. The worst part was how much I missed my brother, Mark. He texted me a couple of times in the first week, saying he wanted to talk, but I couldn't bring myself to answer him. I didn't trust that he wouldn't run back to them with everything I said. And I didn't trust myself not to spill my entire plan before it was ready. Work wasn't much of a distraction either. I still pulled my shifts and did what I had to, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. Every time a customer complained about something minor, every time a coworker made a lazy joke about me, living with mom and dad, I felt my jaw tighten. Nobody knew what I was carrying. Nobody knew that the kid they thought was struggling to launch had been secretly holding up his parents' entire world. The emotional weight started to take a physical toll. I lost almost 5 pounds without trying, my appetite barely there. Nights became an endless cycle of replaying old arguments in my head, thinking about every little thing they'd said over the years, every comparison to Mark, every sigh of disappointment, every casual reminder that I wasn't measuring up. It was like all the hurt I'd swallowed for years was finally catching up to me. I think that's why, 2 weeks in, I found myself driving by their house late one night. I didn't go in. I just parked a couple of blocks away and sat there with the engine off, staring at the faint glow of the porch light. Part of me wanted to march right in and demand they apologize. Another part wanted to turn the car around and never come back. Instead, I just sat there until my coffee went cold, then drove home again. A few days later, Mark showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't answer the door, but he kept knocking until I did. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping much either. "Bran," he said as soon as I opened the door, "we need to talk." I let him in, though I didn't say much. We sat at the kitchen table, and he started telling me how things had been at the house, how dad was angrier than ever, how mom cried one night because the payment was coming up and she didn't know what they were going to do. "I'm not telling you this to guilt you," Mark said carefully. "I'm just saying they're scared. I don't think they expected you to actually walk away." "They should have," I said quietly. He sighed. "You've got to know they're not handling this well." "I'm not either. I didn't know you were doing all that for them, Brandon. But now that I do, I can't stop thinking about how unfair it's been." For a second, I thought he might actually take my side. But then he said, "Maybe just one more month? Just to give them time to figure things out." I almost laughed, but it came out sounding more like a choke. "1 more month? Mark, I've been saying just 1 more month for 3 years. That's how we got here." He didn't argue, but I could tell he wanted to. "They're your parents," he said finally. "Yeah," I said, standing up and walking to the counter where I'd left that folder of documents. "And these are the records of every single time I saved them. Every receipt, every transfer. Do you think they've kept a single one? Do you think they'd even believe me if I didn't have proof?" Mark looked at the folder like it was radioactive. "What are you going to do with that?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I know I'm done letting them rewrite history. If they want to act like I've been freeloading this whole time, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." He didn't say anything to that. He just stood up, gave me a long look, and left. After he was gone, I sat back down and opened the folder again. I spread everything out across the table, one page after another, until it was all in front of me. Seeing it laid out like that was overwhelming. 3 years of my life, in black and white. Thousands of dollars, dozens of late-night transfers. All those overtime shifts that had left me dead on my feet. And still, they had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't doing enough. That night, I started writing everything down. Not just the payments, but the memories. The night Mom called me crying when she first realized they were behind. The day Dad handed me the bank login info and told me I couldn't screw this up. The first time I saw Mark bring home a new car while I was wondering if I could afford groceries. It felt like pouring poison out of a wound. It hurt, but it also cleared my head. The next weekend, I skipped family dinner. When Mom called to ask why I wasn't there, I told her I was busy. She started to say something, probably about the payment, but I hung up before she could finish. Then I turned my phone off and went for a long walk. As I walked through the quiet streets, I realized something important. I wasn't just cutting them off out of anger anymore. I was preparing myself for what came next. Because if they thought they could force me to keep sacrificing for them, they were about to learn how wrong they were. I didn't have a clear plan yet, but I was starting to feel the shape of one forming. It wasn't just about refusing to pay. It was about making sure they couldn't use me again, not emotionally, not financially, not in any way. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just going to be about walking away. This was going to be about taking back control completely. The turning point didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, almost imperceptibly, like light seeping under a door at dawn. After weeks of exhaustion, of letting my emotions chew me up from the inside, I woke up one morning and felt lighter. Not happy, not exactly, but sharper, clearer. Like I could finally see the road in front of me instead of just stumbling forward in the dark. I started with the basics. I went through my bank accounts and changed every password. I went into the branch in person and removed my parents' access entirely, even though the teller gave me a strange look when I insisted on signing 3 separate confirmation forms. When I walked out of the bank that day, I actually smiled for the first time in months. The feeling of finally shutting that door behind me, of knowing they couldn't reach into my pockets again, was addictive. But I didn't stop there. I picked up more hours at work, but not because I needed the money for them anymore. This time, I was doing it for me. Every extra shift, every late night, was money I put straight into savings. It was different now. I wasn't just surviving. I was building something. The first time I saw my savings account cross the 5-figure mark, I sat there staring at the screen with a lump in my throat. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. All mine. With that small cushion under me, I started making moves I'd been putting off for years. I upgraded my beat-up old car that had been barely limping along. Nothing flashy, just something reliable that didn't make me pray every time I turned the key. Then I started looking at apartments that weren't just temporary stops until I figured things out. I wanted somewhere I could breathe, somewhere that actually felt like home. By late spring, I'd signed the lease on a place that made me feel like I'd finally stepped into my own life. Hardwood floors, big windows, enough space for a real dining table instead of eating hunched over the counter. The first night I slept there, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thought, this is what it feels like to choose yourself. And the better things got for me, the worse my parents' calls became. The texts started piling up. First, little guilt trips. The house feels so empty without you. Then flat-out demands. We expect you to send your share of the payment this Friday. When I didn't respond, they escalated. Mom showed up at my work one afternoon, which nearly made my manager throw me out of the building. She tried to corner me in the parking lot, tears streaming down her face, begging me to be reasonable. Reasonable, I said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. You went into my bank account without asking. You stole from me. That was your father's decision, she whispered, like that made it any better. He's just scared. We're both scared. We could lose everything. I shook my head. I already lost everything when I realized you didn't respect me. You're asking for money, but what you really want is control. She cried harder, said she didn't recognize me anymore. I almost told her that was the point, that I wasn't the quiet, obedient Brandon who bent over backward to keep the peace, but I bit my tongue. Because I'd realized something. Every time I held my ground, they panicked just a little more. Every time I didn't answer the phone, every time I refused to engage, they lost a little more of the power they'd held over me for so long. And while part of me hated watching them struggle, another part of me, the part that had been crushed under their expectations for years, felt something dark and electric stirring. It was around this time that Mark reached out again, this time suggesting we grab coffee. I agreed, though I wasn't sure what he wanted. He looked more relaxed than the last time I'd seen him, but still uneasy, like he was caught in the middle of something he didn't want to be part of. They're desperate, he told me after a few minutes of small talk. Dad's talking about taking out a second loan, but the interest rates right now are terrible. He keeps saying if you would just come back to the table, it would all be fine. I stirred my coffee slowly. That's not going to happen. I figured, Mark said. Then, after a pause, they said some stuff about you that I didn't like. About how you owe them, because they let you stay there so long. I told them they were out of line. That caught me off guard. You did? He nodded. I'm not going to lie, Bran. I used to think they were right about you. That you were just dragging your feet while I was out there getting my life together. But now I see it differently. You were carrying them while they were praising me. Hearing him say that out loud was like someone letting fresh air into a locked room. Thanks, I said quietly. That's why I wanted to tell you this, he continued. I overheard Dad talking about calling the bank again. Something about getting access to the equity in the house. I don't think he realizes how much danger he's putting them in. I sat back, my mind already spinning. Or maybe he does, I said. That night, I went home and started making copies of everything in my folder, physical and digital. I put the originals in a fireproof safe and emailed the files to myself. Then I started researching what legal options I had if they tried to drag me back into their mess. The deeper I went, the more I realized I had leverage, more than I'd ever imagined. I had proof of every payment I'd made, proof of the unauthorized withdrawals, and even the text where they demanded money after I'd told them I was done. And if push came to shove, I could show anyone, lawyers, courts, even extended family, exactly who had been keeping that house afloat all these years. By early summer, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. My savings account was growing faster than ever. My new apartment felt like a sanctuary, and I'd even started dating someone seriously for the first time in years. She was kind, patient, and didn't flinch when I told her about everything with my parents. You've been through hell, she told me one night when we were sitting on my couch, papers from my folder spread across the coffee table. But you're still standing. You should be proud of that. I thought about that for a long time after she left. Proud. That was a word I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. And maybe it was time I finally did. Because I was stronger now. Independent. And if my parents still thought they could drag me back into the role of the dutiful son who would sacrifice everything to keep them comfortable, they were in for a rude awakening. I wasn't just ready to defend myself anymore. I was ready to go on the offensive. By the time summer was in full swing, the distance between me and my parents had stretched into something unrecognizable. We weren't just on different pages. We were living in different books entirely. They were still clinging to the idea that I'd eventually come around, that I'd crack under the guilt they kept trying to pile on. But what they didn't know was that every day apart made me stronger, more certain that walking away had been the right move. The shift really started one Saturday morning when I got a letter from the county recorder's office. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but when I tore it open and saw the header, Property Tax Assessment, I felt a spark of curiosity. It wasn't addressed to me personally, but because I was still listed as a contributor on the mortgage account, thanks to those payments I'd made for 3 years, my name had been added as a contact of record. Inside was a notice showing the property taxes for my parents' house had spiked significantly due to a reassessment. The figure made my stomach flip. It was more than double what I remembered from last year. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the paper, feeling a mixture of dread and grim satisfaction. If they were already struggling, this was going to push them to the edge. But then something caught my eye. The notice listed the property's parcel number, and right below it, the official owner of record, Thomas and Elaine Harper, joint tenants, with Brandon Harper listed as lien holder. My breath caught. I'd completely forgotten that when I started covering those payments, the bank had added me as a partial lien holder on the property to secure my recurring contributions. At the time, it had seemed like a meaningless legal formality, just a way to make sure my payments counted as authorized. But now, staring at that line in black and white, I realized what it meant. I had legal standing. I wasn't just a helpful son sending money out of the goodness of my heart. I had a paper trail and an official claim, small but real, on the house. If my parents tried to refinance, sell, or even transfer ownership, my signature would likely be required. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. I spent the next few days digging deeper. I went online and pulled every public record I could find about the property, title history, liens, everything. I found the original mortgage documents, the date they'd nearly defaulted, and even the paperwork from when my payments first started showing up. The deeper I went, the more control I realized I had. I didn't have enough ownership to just take the house outright, of course, but I had enough to stop them from making big moves without me. Enough to make sure they couldn't go behind my back and take out another loan using the house as collateral. Enough to make sure that if things escalated, I had leverage. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing. I met with a lawyer a week later, an unassuming guy with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm, measured voice. I laid out everything. The payments, the unauthorized withdrawals, the property records, even the texts where my parents demanded money. He listened quietly, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Brandon, you have a very strong case here. Technically, you could sue for reimbursement of every payment you've made. At minimum, you have the right to block any refinancing or sale without your consent. If they've accessed your bank account without authorization recently, you may even have grounds for a fraud claim." I let out a slow breath. So I'm not crazy. I'm not overreacting. Not even close, he said with a faint smile. If anything, you've been more patient than most people would be. You've got options. The question is just how far you want to take this. I left his office feeling strangely steady, like I'd just put on armor I didn't know I owned. I wasn't sure yet if I'd go as far as suing, but it felt good knowing I could. Meanwhile, life outside of this drama kept improving. My new apartment was finally starting to feel lived in, and my girlfriend and I had fallen into an easy rhythm. Weeknight dinners, lazy Sunday mornings, quiet evenings talking about the future. She was the first person I'd ever told the whole story to, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she encouraged me to think strategically about what came next. "You have the high ground now," she said one night as we sat on the couch going through my folder again. "The old you might have just cut them off and walked away, but you don't have to do that anymore. You can make them face what they did." And she was right. The final piece of the puzzle came one afternoon when Mark called me unexpectedly. He sounded tense. "Bran," he said, "I thought you should know. Dad tried to take out a home equity loan last week. The bank denied it because your name is on the account. He's furious. Says you're holding the family hostage." I couldn't help the smile that crept across my face. "Good," I said simply. "Brandon," Mark said carefully, "what are you going to do?" "I'm going to make sure they can't hurt me again," I said. "And if that means stopping them from digging themselves into a deeper hole, then that's exactly what I'll do." After that call, I sat at my desk and drafted a letter. Not an emotional one, not an angry rant, just a clear, legally sound statement, prepared with my lawyer's help, informing my parents that any future actions involving the property required my written consent. I printed it, signed it, and mailed a copy by certified post. When the delivery confirmation came through 2 days later, I felt an odd mix of adrenaline and calm. There was no going back now. I hadn't just removed myself from their control. I'd stepped into a position where I could control the situation entirely. And for the first time, I was ready to use that power. Because if they wanted to keep treating me like the family scapegoat, they were about to find out what happens when the scapegoat learns how to fight back. I waited until the end of the month to make my move. Timing was everything now, and I wanted the moment to sting, not out of cruelty, but because I needed them to finally feel the weight of what they had done to me. The first step was silence. I ignored every call, every text, every guilt-laced message that said things like, "Your father can't sleep," or "We might lose the house. Brandon, please think about what you're doing." I needed them unsettled, off balance, waiting for a response that wasn't coming. Then, 3 days before the next mortgage payment was due, I sent a single text to the family group chat. "Meeting at the house. Saturday, 3 p.m. Everyone there." No explanation, no apology. Just the time and place. When I pulled into the driveway that Saturday, Mark's car was already there, along with Dad's truck. My chest tightened as I stepped out of my car, the folder of documents tucked under my arm. The air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. Mom opened the door when I knocked. Her expression was a mix of relief and wariness. "Brandon," she said carefully, "we didn't know if you'd ever come back." "I'm not here for dinner," I said flatly, brushing past her and heading toward the living room. They were all waiting there, Mom perched on the edge of the couch, Dad in his recliner with his arms crossed, Mark standing with his hands shoved in his pockets. The air was thick with unspoken words. "Let's just get this over with," Dad said gruffly. I set the folder on the coffee table and began spreading the papers out one by one. Bank statements, payment confirmations, text message screenshots, and finally, the letter from my lawyer. "This," I said, tapping the first stack, "is every payment I made on this house for the last 3 years. This," I tapped the next pile, "is proof of the unauthorized withdrawals from my account after I told you to stop. And this," I held up the letter, "is a legal notice that no one touches this house. No refinancing, no selling, no loans, without my written consent." Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Dad's face went red. Mark just looked from me to the table, his expression unreadable. "You had no right to do this," Dad growled. "Yes," I said evenly, "I did. Legally, I have standing on this property. Every dollar I paid gave me more. And now, you can't make a single financial move without my permission. You're holding us hostage," Mom whispered. "No," I said, my voice calm, almost cold. "I'm protecting myself. Because you already proved you'd take from me without asking. This ends today." I slid one final paper across the table, an itemized invoice of everything I had paid, down to the cent. "This is what I'm owed," I said. "I'm not asking you to pay it today. I'm not even demanding repayment at all. But from this moment forward, every penny I've already put into this house counts as equity. When you're gone, I get my share before this house is passed to anyone else. If you try to cut me out, this paperwork goes to court." Mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad slammed his fist against the arm of the chair. "You think you can threaten us in our own home?" "This isn't a threat," I said quietly. "It's a boundary. And if you cross it again, it becomes a lawsuit." The room went so still I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Mark finally spoke. "He's right," he said softly. Dad whipped his head toward him. "Excuse me." "He's right," Mark repeated, more firmly this time. "You've been leaning on him for years and treating him like dirt while he was bailing you out. This is the least you can do." For a moment, I thought Dad was going to explode. But then he just sank back into his chair, his jaw tight, saying nothing. I gathered the papers back into the folder, leaving only the legal letter and invoice on the table. "You can keep those," I said. "Consider them reminders." Then I stood, my heart steady in my chest, and walked toward the door. "Brandon," Mom said suddenly, her voice breaking. I paused but didn't turn around. "We just wanted what was best for the family," she said. I took a deep breath and finally looked back at her. So did I? The difference is, I actually paid for it. And with that, I walked out. When I got back to my car, my hands were shaking, not with fear this time, but with something almost like relief. For the first time, I felt like I had finally been heard. Not because they agreed with me, but because I had forced them to face the truth. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw all 3 of them standing in the doorway, watching me go. For once, I didn't feel like the kid who had to earn their approval. I felt like the man who had just taken back control of his own life. And this time, I knew there was no going back. The next few weeks were strangely quiet, eerily so. After years of constant nagging, phone calls, and guilt trips, my parents seemed to vanish from my life almost completely. It was like they had taken a collective vow of silence. At first, I wondered if they were plotting something behind my back, but then the messages from Mark started coming in. "They're not taking it well," he texted me one night. "Dad hasn't spoken to anyone in days. Mom's barely getting out of bed." I stared at the message for a long time. The old me would have felt a pang of guilt, maybe even gone back over there to smooth things over. But this time I didn't. They weren't just upset. They were dealing with the fact that they couldn't control me anymore. That was their choice to sit with, not mine. Still, the fallout came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks after that confrontation, I got a call from the bank. The woman on the line sounded nervous as she told me someone had tried to apply for another loan against the house, again. She confirmed that because of the lien holder status, they had to call me before processing anything. "Should I block the application?" she asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Deny it." And please note in the file that any future attempts without my consent should be flagged. When I hung up, I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. They were still trying to go around me, still trying to treat me like a problem to work around instead of a person to respect. That night, I drafted another letter, shorter this time, firmer. I reminded them that any further attempts to take out loans would be considered financial misconduct and that I wouldn't hesitate to escalate legally. I sent the letter via certified mail again, and I knew from the delivery receipt that they got it 2 days later. This time, Dad called me. "Brandon," he said, his voice tight, "this has gone far enough. You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said calmly. "I'm stopping you from tearing me apart. There's a difference. You're going to regret this one day," he warned. I almost smiled at that. Maybe, but at least when that day comes, I'll still have my dignity and my savings. I hung up before he could reply. It was Mark who told me what happened next. A month later, he came by my apartment and sat at my kitchen table with a look that was equal parts frustration and reluctant admiration. "They sold the boat," he said. I blinked. "The boat?" He nodded. "And Dad's truck. They finally admitted they couldn't keep up with the payments. They're cutting back on everything. Mom even canceled her garden club membership." For a moment, I didn't know how to feel. There was a part of me that still wished they had chosen to work with me instead of against me. But another part, the part that had spent 3 years carrying them, felt a strange sense of justice. They were finally living within their means, finally facing the reality I'd been facing all along. "Good," I said finally. "It's about time." Mark studied me for a long moment. "You know," he said, "I think they respect you now, even if they'll never admit it." I shrugged. Respect was never the point. Boundaries were. After that, things settled into a new normal. My parents and I didn't talk much, but when we did, the conversations were civil, almost businesslike. They stopped asking me for money. They stopped comparing me to Mark. And the next time I went over to the house, months later, I noticed something different. The tension was gone. Mom greeted me with a small, tentative smile, and Dad nodded stiffly when I walked in, but there was no lecture, no side comments. For the first time in years, we sat at that dining table and ate a meal in peace. As we were clearing the dishes, Dad stopped me in the hallway. He didn't meet my eyes when he spoke. "You did what you had to do," he said gruffly. "I get it now." I nodded once. "I know." And that was it. Not an apology, not exactly, but the closest he would ever come. When I left that night, I stood for a moment at the end of the driveway, looking back at the house. The porch light glowed softly against the dark, just like it had that night I sat in my car wondering if I'd ever come back. But this time, I didn't feel small. I felt whole. This was no longer the house that held me hostage, no longer the place I kept afloat at the expense of my own happiness. It was just a house, one I had helped save, but one that no longer defined me. As I got in my car and started the engine, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even bitter. I was free. And as I drove away, the thought that echoed in my mind wasn't about revenge or repayment or justice. It was simply this: they would never control me again. And that, more than anything else, was the victory I had been fighting for all along. My name's Evan. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life my father has loved nothing more than to remind me how much of a disappointment I supposedly was. I grew up hearing phrases like useless dreamer and lazy boy tossed around the dinner table like they were my actual name. It didn't matter if I brought home straight A's, if I got into a good college, or even when I landed my first real job. He always found a way to downplay it. According to him, I was never enough. And as much as I hated to admit it, I carried that weight with me for years. It ate at me, made me doubt myself, and kept me in a constant state of trying to prove him wrong. You'd think by the time I became an adult and built a stable life of my own, he'd finally let it go. But if anything, it only got worse. He found new ways to humiliate me, usually in front of other family members. Whenever there was a gathering, he'd lean back in his chair, glass in hand, and laugh as he told the same tired story about how I once tried to start a business in high school by mowing lawns and somehow lost money. He'd embellish, of course, throwing in details about how I couldn't even fix the mower when it broke or how I charged less than the neighborhood kid down the street. The whole table would chuckle uncomfortably, and I'd sit there, cheeks burning, pretending it didn't sting. My mom always stayed quiet during these moments. She'd shoot me a quick sympathetic glance, then look away. My younger sister, Melanie, wasn't much better. If anything, she liked to pile on. She'd grin at Dad's stories, add her own little jabs, and remind me how I was the golden child in my own head, not in real life. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a father who had no respect for me. I was dealing with a family who had decided their favorite pastime was undermining me. So I did what anyone in my shoes would. I distanced myself. I threw myself into my career, worked long hours, and stopped showing up to every family dinner I was invited to. I thought maybe if I created space, they'd lose interest in mocking me, or maybe, just maybe, they'd realize what they were losing. But my father wasn't the kind of man to just let go. He wanted control, and my absence only seemed to make him more determined to remind me that, in his mind, I was still the boy who couldn't even handle a lawnmower. The breaking point came a few months ago, though I didn't see it coming. My dad had gotten into a bitter legal dispute with my late uncle's family over property. Somehow, in that mess, he decided I should be dragged into it. I tried to avoid it. I wanted no part in their endless squabbles. But before I knew it, I was subpoenaed. I had to sit in that courtroom, forced to listen as my father spun his narrative about how I was too irresponsible to be trusted with anything, not even a share of family property. And then came the words that still ring in my ears. My son can't even pay his own bills. He's always been a useless dreamer. I felt the room tilt for a moment. It was like being 10 years old again, sitting at that dinner table, every insult heavy on my chest. But this time, something was different. I wasn't the kid who had to take it. I wasn't even the young man quietly grinding to prove himself. I was a grown adult, with years of hard work behind me and a life I had built without him. And then, the judge leaned forward. He actually paused, looked straight at my father, and in the kind of calm, deliberate tone that cuts sharper than shouting, said, "He's been a senior surgeon for almost a decade." The air in the courtroom shifted. My dad's face went pale, like the blood drained out of him all at once. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say. The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable, it was suffocating. I sat there, stunned, my heart hammering in my chest. After years of being painted as a failure, the truth had been laid bare in front of everyone, and it didn't come from me. It came from an authority my father couldn't dismiss, couldn't talk over, couldn't mock. That moment was just the spark, though, because what happened after, that's where things really started to unravel. After that day in court, you'd think my dad might have backed off. Most people, when publicly embarrassed like that, would at least learn to keep quiet. But my father wasn't most people. He had too much pride, too much stubbornness baked into his bones to ever admit he was wrong. Instead of easing up, he doubled down. The next week, I got a phone call from Melanie. She started off with her usual sugar-coated tone. "Hey, Evan, I just wanted to check in on you after court. Dad's been really upset, you know?" That last part carried a subtle accusation, like I'd been the one to embarrass him, not his own reckless words. I stayed silent, letting her talk, because I could tell she had a script. She rambled about how Dad was just under stress and didn't mean what he said, then slipped in, almost casually, "Besides, you know how you come across sometimes. You don't really share your life with us, and it makes it look like you're hiding something. Maybe if you were more open, Dad wouldn't have felt like he needed to say those things." That was Melanie in a nutshell, always finding a way to twist the knife while pretending to soothe the wound. I told her I wasn't interested in debating my career choices or my father's inability to show basic respect. Her tone instantly shifted, sharp as glass. "You're always so defensive, Evan. It's no wonder Dad thinks you're ungrateful." Then she hung up. A few days later, Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. She carried a container of food in her hands, but her eyes were heavy. "I just want peace in the family," she sighed as she sat down at my kitchen table. She explained that Dad felt humiliated and blamed me for letting the judge make him look stupid. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. The judge had spoken the truth, and somehow, I was the villain. Mom leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "If you could just talk to him, maybe apologize, it would help calm things down." Apologize. That was her solution. Apologize for being publicly insulted, apologize for the career I'd built, apologize for finally having the truth spoken out loud. I told her I wouldn't be doing that, and her expression hardened. She left the food on the counter, stood up, and said, "I don't know what's happened to you. You used to be such a kind boy. Now it feels like you only care about yourself." She didn't even look back as she walked out. The whispers in the family started soon after. A cousin texted me saying he'd heard from my dad that I was arrogant now and thought I was better than everyone else because of my job. Another aunt cornered me at the grocery store and asked why I was turning against my own blood when my father had done so much for me growing up. It was like an entire narrative was being rewritten behind my back, and I was the villain in their version of events. Meanwhile, my dad played the victim. He told anyone who'd listen that I had embarrassed him in front of a judge, that I was disrespectful, that I had abandoned the family. He conveniently left out the part where he called me useless in open court. He told the story so many times that by the next family dinner, when I reluctantly showed up, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The room went quiet when I walked in, and all eyes darted between me and my father. He barely looked at me, but when he did, it was with that smug, tight-lipped smile that said I've already won them over. And the worst part? It worked. When the meal was over, Melanie announced that she and her husband needed help with a down payment for a new house. My dad, without missing a beat, said, "Evan can help with that, can't you? He's doing so well now, after all." The entire table turned to me, expectant. I felt like I'd been ambushed. I shook my head and said calmly, "I'm not giving anyone money." The silence that followed was deafening. My father scoffed loudly, then leaned back in his chair with that mocking laugh I'd grown up hearing. "See? All that education, all that money, and he can't even support his own family. Just proves what I've been saying all along. Selfish, useless dreamer." I clenched my jaw so hard I thought I might crack a tooth. The room buzzed with uneasy laughter, a few awkward coughs, and then Melanie burst out. "Wow, Evan, you really can't let go of the past, can you? We're family. We help each other." But that wasn't help. It was expectation, obligation, manipulation. And it was becoming clearer than ever that no matter what I did, no matter how much I achieved, they would always try to pull me down, to keep me in the role they had written for me since childhood. That dinner was the moment I realized something. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was about control. And if I didn't put a stop to it, they would keep tightening their grip until I either broke or finally fought back. The weeks after that disastrous family dinner felt like a slow drip of poison. Every interaction, every phone call, carried some new demand or guilt trip. If I didn't answer, they accused me of ignoring the family. If I did pick up, it was always the same chorus. "Help your sister, support your dad. Why are you being so cold?" It didn't matter what I said. They had already decided I was the problem. Then came the betrayal, the kind that takes whatever fragile thread of trust you have left and severs it completely. It started with a letter in the mail. At first glance, I thought it was junk, but when I saw the sender's name, my bank, I felt a knot twist in my stomach. Inside was a notice. A loan application had been filed under my name, flagged for additional verification. I froze. I hadn't applied for any loan. When I called the bank, the representative hesitated, then explained that someone had attempted to co-sign using my information. The applicant? Melanie. I remember sitting at my desk, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles went white. She hadn't even asked me. She had taken my personal information, likely something she'd gotten years ago when we were filling out family paperwork, and tried to use it to secure a massive loan. The bank caught it because the signatures didn't match and because, thankfully, I'd set up alerts for anything tied to my credit. The rage I felt in that moment is hard to describe. It wasn't just anger at the act itself. It was the realization that my own sister, the person who grew up in the same house as me, who shared holidays and childhood memories with me, had looked at me not as a brother, but as a resource to exploit. And I knew, without even asking, that my father was behind it. It was too brazen, too reckless, too entitled to be just Melanie's idea. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring, her voice dripping with fake cheer. "Evan, how are you? I didn't waste time. Why did you try to take out a loan in my name?" There was silence for a beat, then a sharp exhale. "Oh, that. Don't be so dramatic, Evan. Dad said it would be fine. We were just trying to speed things up with the house. You make plenty of money. You wouldn't even notice. You stole my identity." I cut in, my voice shaking. "Do you understand that? That's a crime." Her tone hardened instantly. "Don't talk to me like that. We're family. You're supposed to help. Dad said you'd react like this, all self-righteous. But it's not a big deal. If the bank hadn't made a fuss, it would have gone through, and we'd all be better off. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My hands were trembling as I set the phone down, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to believe it was just her, but deep down, I knew exactly whose fingerprints were all over this. The confirmation came 2 days later, when Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. He walked in without even waiting for me to invite him, sat down on my couch like he owned the place, and said, "You made a fool of yourself with that bank nonsense. Do you realize how childish you look, making a big deal over paperwork?" I stared at him, speechless. He leaned forward, his voice low and condescending. "That loan would have helped your sister start her life. You think you're better than us because of your title and your paycheck, but you're not. You owe this family, Evan. Without us, you wouldn't be here." I felt something break inside me then. It wasn't just the trust, it was the illusion that, deep down, they cared about me at all. They didn't. To them, I was nothing but a bank account in human form, a punching bag when they needed someone to blame, a scapegoat when their lives didn't measure up. I told him to leave. He laughed as he stood, shook his head, and muttered, "Ungrateful. Always have been." Then he walked out, slamming the door behind him. I sat there in the silence of my apartment, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. For years I tried to keep the peace, tried to shrug off the insults, tried to be the bigger person. But this wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was theft. This was manipulation on a level I couldn't excuse or ignore. And in that moment, I knew there would be no going back. The days after my father stormed out of my apartment felt like walking through fog. I went to work, I scrubbed into surgeries, I spoke to patients with the same calm professionalism I'd always carried. But inside, I felt hollow. Every time I pulled off my gloves and washed my hands, I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize the man staring back. A senior surgeon, respected in the hospital, but somehow still reduced to a child in his father's eyes. Worse, reduced to a tool to be used and discarded. The betrayal with the loan left ripples I hadn't expected. My credit report flagged the attempted fraud, and I had to spend hours on the phone with banks, verifying my identity, putting freezes on accounts, and explaining to strangers that, yes, my own family had tried to forge my name. Each call chipped away at something inside me. It wasn't just paperwork, it was humiliation. I had to say it out loud, admit it, make it real. My sister tried to take out a loan in my name. The more I repeated it, the heavier it felt. Meanwhile, the calls from family didn't stop. They weren't apologetic, they were hostile. Melanie left a voicemail crying about how I had ruined her chance at a future. My mom texted me paragraphs about how family comes first and how I was letting resentment destroy everything. Even an uncle who I hadn't spoken to in years called to say I should let it slide for your father's sake. It was as if they had all agreed that I was the problem, not the theft, not the lies, not the betrayal, but me for daring to say no. I stopped answering. I silenced my phone, let the messages pile up, and focused on the quiet of my apartment. At night, though, it wasn't quiet. At night, the words looped in my head. Useless dreamer, ungrateful son, selfish. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I had become arrogant. Maybe I was cold. Maybe the success I had worked for all these years didn't erase the flaws they had hammered into me since childhood. It hit hardest one Friday evening. I had just finished a 14-hour shift, a surgery that dragged on longer than expected, and I came home to find an envelope slid under my door. No return address, just my name in my father's handwriting. My chest tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Scrawled across it, in his sharp, impatient script, "You will regret turning your back on us. Blood is blood. You can't escape family." I sat on the floor, the letter trembling in my hands, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not a quiet tear, not a choked sob, but the kind of raw, shaking grief that comes when you realize the people who were supposed to protect you are the very ones destroying you. I hated that he could still get to me, still strip me down to nothing with a few sentences. But somewhere in that breakdown, something else stirred. I don't know if it was anger, or survival, or just exhaustion, but a thought took root. I can't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep letting their voices drown out my own. I couldn't keep pretending I was part of a family that saw me as nothing but a scapegoat and a wallet. The next morning, I started small. I called the bank again, set up even tighter security measures. I reached out to a lawyer friend just to ask about my options if this kind of fraud continued. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to plant the seed. And then, for the first time in years, I opened a notebook and began to write. Not medical notes, not work plans, but a simple list. At the top, what I will no longer tolerate. The list grew quickly. No more unannounced visits. No more financial manipulation. No more letting their words define me. By the time I put the pen down, my hand was shaking, but not from fear. From something else, resolve, maybe. The fog wasn't gone, but for the first time, I could see a faint outline of the path ahead. I wasn't ready yet. I was still wounded, still reeling. But I knew one thing. I was done being their victim. And sooner or later, they were going to see just how much of a useless dreamer I had really been. The shift didn't happen overnight. It wasn't some cinematic moment where I woke up one morning with all the pain gone and a clear plan in front of me. It was gradual, like the slow return of feeling in a limb that's been asleep for too long. But the more I leaned into my own life and away from theirs, the more I started to realize how much space they had been taking up in my head. Work, for one, became a sanctuary. I'd always been proud of what I did, but now I threw myself into it with renewed focus. I took on more challenging surgeries, mentored younger doctors, and accepted speaking invitations I would have avoided before. The hospital director pulled me aside one day and said, "Evan, you know you're becoming one of our cornerstones here." It floored me. For years I had been hearing only one narrative, that I was inadequate, undeserving, a disappointment. To have someone I respected acknowledge my value felt like oxygen after being underwater too long. The recognition spread outside the hospital walls. I published a paper on a surgical technique I'd refined, and it gained traction in medical circles. Soon, I was invited to present at a conference overseas. Standing on that stage, lights hot on my face, looking out at hundreds of peers scribbling notes and nodding along. It was like finally stepping into the life I had always envisioned but had been too weighed down to believe I deserved. Financially, too, things blossomed. With my new focus came opportunities one might have overlooked before. I invested smartly, not recklessly, and for the first time in my life, I felt secure. I wasn't just making money. I was building something sustainable. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The same man who mocked me as a useless dreamer was now, indirectly, fueling my drive to ensure I was never dependent on him or anyone else again. But it wasn't only work. I started tending to my personal life in a way I hadn't before. I reconnected with friends I had drifted from, people who reminded me of who I was outside of the family shadow. I even allowed myself to date again. Nothing serious at first, but even casual dinners and conversations felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I had forgotten I owned. The laughter came easier. The silence in my apartment no longer felt oppressive. It felt peaceful. Of course, word of my successes trickled back to my family, and with it came their predictable reactions. Melanie sent me a text one evening after the conference photos surfaced online. "Wow, Mr. Big Shot now, huh? Don't forget who changed your diapers." It was meant as a jab, but all it did was confirm how small their world had become. My dad, according to a cousin, had started telling people that my achievements were luck or overhyped. The more I rose, the more desperate he became to drag me back down. And yet, their bitterness no longer hit the same way. It didn't cut, it bounced off. For the first time, I wasn't scrambling to prove myself. I didn't need their approval. I had my own, and that was enough. Still, in quiet moments, I felt the sting of the past. I'd catch myself remembering the courtroom, the loan attempt, the letter shoved under my door. The anger hadn't disappeared, it had transformed. It wasn't the raw, consuming kind anymore. It was steady, simmering, focused. I knew better than to act rashly. But I also knew this. The power dynamic had shifted. They had tried to paint me as a failure. They had tried to use me as a crutch. They had tried to break me. And yet, here I was, stronger, sharper, untethered. And slowly, a thought began to take shape. What if I didn't just walk away? What if, instead, I showed them, calmly, deliberately, exactly who I had become? Not through shouting matches, not through petty arguments, but through actions they couldn't twist, achievements they couldn't deny, and choices that would leave them no room to manipulate me again. I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet, but for the first time in my life, I realized something. I didn't need to survive their games anymore. I was in a position to end them. The setup began almost by accident. I wasn't sitting around plotting, at least not consciously. But when you've spent years on the defensive, years absorbing hits from every angle, your eyes start picking up details other people miss. You learn to notice patterns, to connect dots, to file away information for later. And as my life steadied and grew, I realized those old habits, born from survival, were now giving me an edge. It started with Melanie. Word reached me through a mutual acquaintance, one of her old college friends who'd been in town for a wedding, that she and her husband were in deeper financial trouble than anyone knew. Their dream house had turned into a money pit. Renovations had stalled, bills piled up, and apparently the attempted loan in my name wasn't just desperation, it was necessity. The house was half finished, mortgage payments were eating them alive, and they were quietly borrowing from family members just to stay afloat. I filed that away. Then there was my father. I'd mostly avoided direct contact, but one day while checking on some family property records, something I had neglected for years, I noticed something peculiar. A tract of land that had belonged to my late uncle, the very property at the heart of that courtroom dispute, had been quietly transferred. On paper, it looked like a sale, but the numbers didn't add up. The buyer was a Shell LLC, and when I dug deeper through public records, I noticed something odd. The LLC had been registered by one of my father's longtime drinking buddies, a man who couldn't spell equity if you spotted him the first 5 letters. It didn't take much imagination to realize Dad was hiding assets, playing games with paperwork, probably to keep them out of reach of other relatives or creditors. I filed that away too. The final piece fell into my lap at work. A colleague, knowing my family was local, casually mentioned seeing my father arguing at the county office. He hadn't noticed me nearby, but apparently the clerk had gotten fed up with his yelling and told him, loud enough for half the office to hear, "Sir, if you don't pay the overdue taxes, this property will be repossessed. It doesn't matter what your family name is. Overdue taxes, hidden transfers, a daughter drowning in debt." For the first time in years, I didn't just feel like their scapegoat. I felt like someone standing in the shadows, watching as they dug their own graves with shovels they didn't realize I could see. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They had always assumed I was powerless, that I was too timid or too naive to fight back. They banked on the version of me they had bullied into silence. But that man was gone. In his place stood someone with resources, connections, and knowledge, and most importantly, patience. So I began to prepare. Quietly, deliberately. I reached out to that lawyer friend again, this time not just to ask about fraud protections, but to walk me through the finer points of property law and inheritance disputes. I framed it as curiosity, professional interest, but I listened carefully, making notes. I reviewed my own finances, strengthened my protections, ensured that nothing of mine could be touched without my consent. And then, slowly, I started gathering receipts, literal and figurative, copies of public records, notes from conversations, printouts of tax delinquencies, whispers I heard from mutual acquaintances. Each one went into a folder I kept locked in my office. Not because I was ready to use them yet, but because I knew a day would come when the opportunity presented itself. Every evening, when I sat in my quiet apartment with the folder on my desk, I felt the weight of it. It wasn't heavy physically, but symbolically, it carried years of insults, manipulation, betrayal. Years of being told I was nothing. Now, finally, I had proof that the very people who mocked me were balancing on a house of cards. And when that house started to shake, I would be ready. I didn't rush it. That was the key. Revenge, at least the kind that leaves an echo, isn't about snapping back in anger. It's about patience. Timing. Making sure the other side never sees the punch until it's already landed. And for months, I watched quietly as the cracks in my family's facade widened. It started with Melanie. Her situation with the house reached a breaking point. Contractors had walked off the job, unpaid. The mortgage was behind. She and her husband were juggling credit cards to cover groceries, but outwardly they still tried to project this image of moving up in the world. I waited, saying nothing, until one evening she called me, her voice brittle. "Evan," she started, forcing brightness into her tone. "You know, I've been thinking about how close we used to be as kids. Don't you miss that? I feel like we've drifted, and I'd love to rebuild that bond. Family is everything, you know?" I let her talk for nearly 10 minutes before cutting in. How much do you need? There was a pause. Then she laughed nervously. What? Oh, come on. Evan, I wasn't. How much? I repeated. The silence stretched, and finally she admitted it. They were staring down foreclosure. They needed tens of thousands, fast. I told her I'd think about it. But instead of wiring her a cent, I sent an anonymous tip to the bank's fraud department about her prior attempt to co-sign under my name. I attached documentation I had carefully saved. I knew it wouldn't land her in prison, not yet, but it would put a red flag on any financial application she touched, which meant that when she and her husband tried to refinance to save the house, the doors slammed shut. The foreclosure notice came within weeks, and I never had to raise my voice, never had to lift more than a pen. Then came my father. His Shell LLC game had always been sloppy, and I suspected he counted on no one in the family being savvy enough to connect the dots. But I wasn't the boy who once got mocked for losing money mowing lawns. I was a surgeon, precise by nature, patient by training, and armed with knowledge. With the help of my lawyer friend, I compiled every record I'd uncovered. The transfers, the overdue taxes, the shady registrations. We didn't go straight to court. No, that would have been too obvious. Instead, we filed a quiet inquiry with the county, citing concerns over irregular property transfers. Bureaucracy is slow, but it's relentless. Weeks later, my father stormed into the family group chat, raging about government parasites and nosy officials. He didn't know it was me who had lit the match. All I had to do was sit back as the county flagged his properties for review and the IRS took an interest in his taxes. And still, I kept my distance. That was the most satisfying part. I didn't argue with him. I didn't show up to shout matches. I didn't give him the satisfaction of knowing I was behind it. I lived my life, attended conferences, scrubbed into surgeries, smiled at colleagues. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, the world he thought he controlled was collapsing. The final stroke came when an extended relative, the same cousin who had once texted me parroting my dad's insults, reached out in a panic. Did you hear about your dad? They're saying he might lose the property. And Melanie, she and her husband are back living with your mom. It's bad, Evan. Real bad. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I said calmly, I hope they figure it out. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to declare victory. The revenge wasn't about rubbing their faces in it. It was about finally shifting the power. They had spent years telling everyone I was nothing. Now, without me lifting a finger in their direction, their own greed, lies, and entitlement had dragged them under. And they knew it. The next time I saw my father, at a relative's funeral, of all places, he looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. He approached me, opened his mouth like he wanted to sneer, but no words came. Just a tight, pale smile, and then he turned away. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say to me. But I wasn't finished yet. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within a few months, everything my father had spent years clinging to, the image of control, the carefully spun lies about his success, the pedestal he built by tearing me down, crumbled. The county seized one of his properties for unpaid taxes. The IRS froze his accounts while they dug through years of filings. And with his name tied to suspicious transfers, suddenly the friends he'd relied on for shady favors disappeared one by one. Melanie and her husband, meanwhile, had no house, no savings, and no credit worth speaking of. They slunk back into my parents' home, filling it with tension. My mom, caught between loyalty and exhaustion, started calling me late at night, her voice trembling. I don't know how much more of this I can take, Evan, she whispered once. But I had nothing to offer her except silence. I wasn't going to be her bandage while she refused to stop bleeding for my father and sister. The whispers in the extended family shifted, too. The same relatives who once parroted my father's lines about me being selfish now avoided eye contact with him. At gatherings, conversations stopped when he walked in. The humiliation he once loved to heap on me now lived squarely on his shoulders. He tried to fight it, of course, tried to spin news stories about how he was being persecuted, how the government had a vendetta against him, how Evan turned cold and abandoned us. But this time, no one laughed along. No one nodded. They just looked at him the way you look at a man ranting on a street corner, bitter and broken. And me? I lived. I thrived. My career continued to rise. My name gained recognition, and my circle of friends and colleagues grew stronger. For once, my life wasn't defined by what they said or didn't say. I had stepped out of their shadow, and they had collapsed under the weight of their own entitlement. The final moment came one Sunday morning. I was leaving a cafe downtown when I saw him, my father, sitting alone on a bench. His clothes were wrinkled, his face drawn, his shoulders hunched. He looked up, and for the briefest moment, I saw a recognition flicker in his eyes. The man who had once towered over me, mocking me at every chance, now looked small, powerless. He opened his mouth, maybe to ask for help, maybe to beg for something. Money, forgiveness, I'll never know. I didn't stop walking. I met his eyes, calm and steady, and simply said, "You were wrong about me." And then I left him there, sitting in the silence he had once weaponized against me. For the first time in my life, it wasn't me who carried the weight of his words, it was him. And that was the most satisfying revenge of all.